One Piece is a goofy pirate comic, except for the parts where it isn't. These ones, look at them, these are the parts. Some of the most messed up things that I think I've seen in manga in general come directly from One Piece. And there's a number of characters that, when you truly dive into them, have extremely disturbing backstories. To be clear, every character in One Piece with a backstory worth telling does have a sad past, lots of death and feelings and crying so hard that your nose is leaking, that sort of stuff. But some characters go a step further. They go beyond sad and well into the realm of disturbing. The way I find disturbing in this context is tragedy, but with a twist. A twist often inflicted by unusual cruelty, whether it be inflicted by a person or just by a situation. And we're not going to go with the easy options either, e.g. your Namis, your Sanjis, and your Lawses. We know those stories very well. Mother death, mother murder, and well, mother murder again, except this one comes with a bonus of hiding in a pile of corpses to escape a genocide, which is, admittedly, it's pretty messed up. But these stories aren't even close to the depths of disturbing that we will be exploring here today, because the darkest stories simply cannot exist in the spotlight that a main character inhabits. So we're going to go backstage, where we immediately encounter one Boa Hancock and her two sisters, who were former world noble slaves with one shocking detail in their past that most people overlook. To be fair to everyone else, all former slaves have a pretty messed up past, but even amongst that group, the Boa sisters are unique. The earliest visual we have of Boa Hancock is in Chapter 0, and she's somewhere between 7 to 8 age units in total, telling her sisters that you need to be really strong to be a pirate, very much mimicking Luffy's attitude towards piracy at age 7. And so the Boa sisters go on to become pirates at a very young age. However, when Hancock was 12, the three of them were abducted at sea and sold into slavery. And not just under any old slavery, but slavery specific to the world nobles. Again, all slavery is abhorrent, but there is one particular type that you absolutely do not want, and it's this one. The three sisters were stripped, chained, and violently branded with the hoof mark of the world nobles, and Boa Hancock describes her experience as follows. The first man I ever saw instilled an undying fear in me. It was all so terrible. I knew nothing but despair. I used to pray for death. Hence the hatred of men, because you'd probably hate men as well if the first one you saw was a world noble. At some stage, Hancock and her sisters were force-fed devil fruits purely for the entertainment of said world nobles, and most people know from here that Fisher Tiger did eventually save the sisters, but what most people neglect and or outright forget is that this event occurred 4 years later. 4 whole years. And you know what? The fact that they were even alive after 4 years is astonishing. Although I don't know whether to call it fortunate or unfortunate, because some interpretations argue that there is implied sexual assault in Hancock's story. It's nothing that's ever been confirmed by Oda, but it's also not in any way out of the question. The world nobles represent the very worst that humanity has to offer. And looking at this fictional pirate comic realistically, there may be a reason why 3 beautiful women survived for 4 years, where many slaves don't even survive a week. It's also one of the rare cases of active PTSD in One Piece, because just thinking about the past mentally broke Sandersonia. It was not a pleasant time, to say the least. And also, this story doesn't yet have a good ending. In a weird way, the Boa sisters never escaped. They still live in the world controlled by their tormentors, and up until recently, they were a key part of upholding that power system. So they were freed simply to serve again. For a change of pace, let's step back in time now. Let's say about 63 years, and let's pick an island at random, and at Elbaf. Elbaf it is. Well, on this island is the story of a cursed child. A non-Harry Potter cursed child, with a lot less time travel, but a lot more cannibalism. And said cursed child is Charlotte Lin Lin, who at heart was just a kid who wanted a family. However, time after time, she was either abandoned by those who couldn't handle her, or used by those who thought they could. The best case scenario for the life of Charlotte Lin Lin was being sold into slavery to the world government by Mother Carmel, a thoroughly disturbing character in and of herself, pretending to be a kind parental figure, earning the trust of children just to sell them off as produce. And it was also oddly appropriate that this institution was called the Sheep's House, because Lin Lin was about to turn this into Silence of the Lambs. On her 6th birthday, Lin Lin experienced the happiest moment of her life, followed immediately by the most heartbreaking, as all of her friends had gathered to celebrate Lin Lin's birthday, and then in the blink of an eye, they all vanished. And some people to this day do not understand what happened in this moment. And I think that's fair enough, because the truth is so dark that you could never put it to page in a shonen manga. Lin Lin lost herself in pure gluttony, devouring the food so voraciously that she didn't stop after it was done, and consumed all of her friends as well as Mother Carmel, and also assorted parts of tables and chairs, which I guess is a nice textural complement to the human flesh. And complementary content contrast is an essential part of any fine cuisine. This is also how we know that if you literally eat a devil fruit user, you inherit their ability, because all of a sudden, Lin Lin ended up with the Sorosoro no Mi powers previously held by Mother Carmel. And to this day, Lin Lin doesn't know what happened to them. It's quite tragic, really. She thinks that everyone just abandoned her like everyone else, which is what led Charlotte Lin Lin to become Big Mom. That and Streisand, who eats meat logs, and surprisingly, that is not a euphemism. He literally did the thing it is that I said. But Big Mom would dedicate her life to fulfilling her dream of having a family that could not abandon her, which was enforced primarily by fear. Why fear? Because fear is the only emotion she seems to be capable of eliciting from people. And no matter what evil she commits, I will always view her as a very tragic character. For a much less sympathetic and much more intentionally twisted character, here is Dr. Hogback, a character that the fanbase has a tendency to forget about, and I don't blame them because his story is downright sickening. And you know what? In retrospect, the warning signs were certainly there because we do have a picture of Hogback as a child, and he looks like a stock standard sociopathic Romulan. You know how in all of the serial killer documentaries, people are always like, what? Him? He seems so normal, so average. Why would I, an also average person, suspect him? Well, Hogback is the opposite. He seemed so suspicious that apparently he was too suspicious to suspect. To add to that, Hogback was a legitimately good, nay, a great doctor, hailed as a miracle surgeon, and even admired by cotton candy lover Chopper. But one day, Hogback fell in love with a theater actress named Victoria Sindri, who promptly turned down his marriage proposal. And unfortunately, soon after this, Sindri would suffer a fatal accident and passed away. Wait, did I say unfortunately? Because that's wrong. This is Hogback we're talking about. So this was most fortunate indeed. Dr. Hogback saw this as a valuable second chance. His obsession with Sindri was so profound that he stole her corpse and reanimated it using the shadow of another woman named Margarita, all thanks to the shadow shenaniganry of one Gecko Moria. But the thing is, he didn't just want to bring Sindri back to life. No, that would be too simple. He wanted to, in his hog mind, improve Sindri by making her into a woman who could not reject him, which worked. And Hogback would consistently exercise this power by physically beating zombie Sindri, and she had to obey each and every order. There is a slight positive ending for someone in this story though, because after Thriller Bark, Margarita did get her shadow back, and Sindri's corpse was assumedly finally allowed to rest. Although actually, who knows? Hogback may still have Sindri's corpse in his possession because he is still alive, even though we have yet to see him post-time skip. Now next up are some characters that we've seen exclusively post-time skip, and this is such an underrated moment when it comes to twisted and disturbing. Fukaboshi, Manboshi, and Ryuboshi, a trio of merman siblings that never get talked about in any context really, but they have one of the toughest moments in the series. When their mother Otohime was murdered by racist scallywag Hody Jones, they did not have the luxury of mourning. The brothers had to immediately act to prevent Shirahoshi from using the power of Poseidon, which would have potentially destroyed Fishman Island. So as their mother slowly died in front of them, Manboshi and Ryuboshi started singing and dancing to distract Shirahoshi, whilst tears endlessly flooded down their eyes. Even Fukaboshi had to put on a smile, even though he didn't dance. And it's one of those gut punches that Eiichiro Oda is so annoyingly good at. It's very similar to Toko watching Yasu die, but not being able to do anything except laugh due to the smile fruit. But I just wanted to throw that in because it's a moment that I never see talked about. But let's get back to the truly twisted. Kurozumi Kanjuro might be one of the most bleak and twisted characters to have ever existed in One Piece. I should say that the story of the Kurozumi clan in general is one of the more weirdly dark aspects of One Piece, because the entire clan were hunted by the people of Wano under the rule of the Kozuki clan, aka our heroes, who did absolutely nothing to stop it and may very well have endorsed it. Wano has a very questionable history. But Kanjuro was born into a theater troupe, and he had the experience of watching his parents get murdered on stage simply because they were Kurozumi, which seeded Kanjuro's lifelong convolution of fiction and reality. Because if his parents can be killed for real in a fictional story, then surely he can play fiction in reality. And I want to pay special attention to the way Oda draws Kanjuro in these flashbacks. Because unlike, I think, literally every other character in the series, Oda purposely draws Kanjuro without form, visually depicting that Kanjuro has no sense of self. He is malleable and versatile, like a really moldy old ditto. And the way Kanjuro dealt with his trauma was via escapism. He decided to play a character, and as it so happens, up-and-coming director Kurozumi Orochi was developing a play with the perfect role for Kanjuro. It was a bit deeper than that though, because this escapism was meant to be more permanent in nature. In Orochi's words, you will live your life as a Kozuki, and ultimately, without a single soul noticing, you will die as a Kozuki. Words which made Kanjuro happy, genuinely happy for the first time since his parents died. He then acted using the only thing that he knew as inspiration, which is death, lots and lots of death, taking on the role of a grave robber, stealing hair from corpses to make brushes, and acting so loyal with the aim of one day being killed alongside Odin and the rest of the Kozuki clan. However, on the night of the show, Kozuki Odin decided to do a bit of improvising, which really messed up the scripted ending of this play. Although in the end, even with all of the time travel stuff, Kanjuro died quite satisfied. He performed his role to perfection, and when he dropped the Kozuki character, he did eventually turn back into the blob that Oda originally depicted him as, with his final legacy being the Kazen Bull, declaring that his final performance would be the glorious death of the Kurozumi clan, which came to fruition, as not only Kanjuro but also Orochi died, and the final remaining Kurozumi, Tama, doesn't even know she is one, so the clan is effectively dead. But elsewhere in the world, a child was being born who was never considered alive to begin with. Her name is Baby 5, a comic relief character with a seriously gut-wrenching past. The gag is that she'll do anything as long as you say that you need her to do it, because she has this crippling desire to be needed, which garners pretty, admittedly, funny results, but the history behind these quirks makes me feel bad for each and every time I've laughed. As a child, she wasn't even raised as a human. She was born in a very poor village to very poor reception. One other villager rebuking Baby 5's mother by saying, "Why did you have the child? It won't be of help for years and it eats plenty." And so her mother abandoned her in the forest with the parting words, "You're no use around here. You're unwanted and unneeded." So as a child, the only value in her life was usefulness. And so that's why in the present day, Baby 5 would happily take her own life if it was of any usefulness to someone else. And in case you haven't realized it by now, the reason why she's called Baby 5 is because her mother didn't even bother to give her a name. To her and the rest of the village, this was just child number 5, hence Baby 5. But even her disturbing backstory pales in comparison to fellow Dressrosa alumni Admiral Fujitora. And this is a unique one because we still don't know the full extent of his mysterious backstory. However, what we do know for a fact is that it definitely belongs in this video. During his life, the evils Fujitora has borne witness to were so severe that his solution to the problem was to blind himself so that he would never have to see them again. And to be clear, we're not just talking one evil singular. We're talking a series of horrifying evils plural throughout his life that led him to this drastic decision. Imagine being in a position where you're seeing so many endless atrocities committed in front of you that your only solution to keep on living in this world is to literally blind yourself. And this also has a twist of modern day tragedy because the only time that Fujitora has ever questioned this decision was the end of Dressrosa, where he actively wanted to see Luffy, with this moment being the only thread of hope that Fujitora has ever experienced. So let me know in the comments, what do you think Fujitora saw that drove him to blind himself? This is the most sinister devil fruit in all of One Piece. This is the equivalent of all of those creepy children in horror movies, because there's just something very unsettling about the corruption of innocence. And that's exactly what Sugar and the Hobby Hobby no Mi are. They take a very innocent theme and distort it into one of the more sickening devil fruit uses in the entire series. But it also happens to be one of the most complicated devil fruits. And to this day, many people still don't understand exactly what it does, and more importantly, how it does the things it is that it does. I'm already getting confused just thinking about it. But this one devil fruit combines the ideas of body transformation, physical control, fusion of living beings, eternal youth, and the ever-exciting realm of contract law. Seriously, what happened? This was supposed to be a fun toy fruit. So where did it all go so horribly, horribly wrong? Well, let's start with the most obvious ability, which is toy transformation. Our darling little psychopath Sugar can turn people into toys with one touch. This already makes it one of the most overpowered devil fruits to have ever existed, and I'm only one sentence into the explanation. Theoretically, Sugar has the ability to defeat anyone in this world with a single touch. I say theoretically because stuff like Haki will get in the way of the very top figures, but if Sugar were to do something like, oh, I don't know, get good, then she'd be absolutely unstoppable. We do have an unconfirmed limitation to this, because whenever Sugar is shown turning people into toys, that action is always performed with her left hand. So we could have a Bon Clay style situation where the devil fruit insists that certain hands are for very specific purposes. And maybe Sugar's right hand is used for turning people back, which we never actually see, because why would she do that? That would ruin her toy collection. But this is very important, because if you were to give this fruit to someone like Shanks, then it may end up being completely useless due to the lack of left arm. However, give this fruit to, say, the Lord of the Coast, and he will make fantastic use of the fruit because he has a left arm at his disposal. I do think the most terrifying possible user would be Big Mom, because Big Mom uses her devil fruit to achieve a similar result, this very twisted Disney-esque civilization of wacky slaves. Interestingly, it's implied that Sugar chooses the toy form as well, as she was was able to transform the Tontatas into the same little black bear. But Sugar has a more disturbing transformation at her disposal because it's not a one-to-one equation. One person does not necessarily equal one toy. For example, when Sugar created the giant nutcrackers, each one of those is actually made up of 8 people, with the mathematical breakdown as follows. 1 person for the head, 2 for the body, 1 for each arm, 1 for the leg, 1 very specifically for the jaws, and 1 for a big ol' nutcracker dick. To be honest, I added that last part. That would be the 9-person variant, and it would bring new meaning to the concept of a nutcracker. But that goes towards my next point. Why stop at 8? Could we create a nutcracker twice as big by using 16 people? Or what about 32 people, maybe even 64? In fact, is there a limit on the amount of people that Sugar can cram together within a single toy slave? I've also been using the word people a lot so far, but it's important to note that Sugar's ability works on all living things. In addition to humans, Sugar has transformed a giraffe, an elephant, a lion, a snake, a cactus, and also a gorilla named Uho, who went on to become best friends with Sengoku. Not to be confused with the actual marine named gorilla, or even former Fleet Admiral Kong, although all 3 of them do look like they're from the same household. But the nature of the Hobby Hobby no Mi means that absolutely no one is off the table. Everyone is very much on the table. It's a very strong table to hold them all up. But Sugar has also targeted world government agents and even entire monarchies. Kings have been turned into toys. So how does she get away with all that? Well, this is where things get truly sinister. Because after transforming her target into a toy, the memories of that target are then erased from all of the non-toys. For example, let's say you have a sister, which Sugar does, actually. It's Monet, and most people miss that connection. But let's say that you have a sister and Sugar turns her into a toy. You then lose all memories of your sister, and it's like she never existed. Kind of like how Monet doesn't exist anymore, due to having her heart stabbed by a maniacal clown scientist. Except it's even worse, because at least Sugar has the memories of Monet. You don't even get that. This is referred to on Dressrosa as the Hobby Hobby curse, and the country was described as being divided into the forgetters and the forgotten. And I remember feeling physically sick when I read this for the first time, because it's very existentially horrific, especially in a series like One Piece where memory and inherited will are everything. For example, what happens when you remove the memory of Shanks from Luffy, or Zeph from Sanji, Saul from Robin, Tom from Frankie, and so on and so forth until we do all of them? These people are who they are as a direct result of their mentors. So if you take those mentors away, those people will change radically, which is an idea that I don't think was ever explored to its fullest during Dressrosa. However, physical evidence of existence does remain, as shown by the statue of Kyros in the Corridor Colosseum, as well as with the list of criminals held by the Marines led by Bastille, waiting patiently outside the Corridor Colosseum to arrest them. There's a really funny moment in Dressrosa when Bastille is just flipping through the list of names and he just goes, "Who are we here to arrest again? I don't know any of these people." And if this was an episode of Star Trek, this is where someone would twig and realize that something has gone very, very wrong. But because this is an episode of fictional pirates, this problem is allowed to persist far longer than it probably should have. About 10 years longer, actually. That's how long Sugar spent dividing the population of Dressrosa into the forgetters and the forgotten. And to be fair to the residents, even if you witnessed Sugar using her powers, you would have no comprehension of what just happened. Because due to the memory erasure, all you'd see is a toy popping into existence. And you may even misjudge Sugar's abilities as something more simplistic, like the power to conjure toys. I do have a curious question though, which is, are the memories erased from Sugar herself? I mean, she obviously knows what her powers do, but does Sugar remember the people that she has transformed into toys? To the best of my knowledge, this question is never answered, but it would explain why they don't really bother trying to capture Kyros, because Sugar doesn't remember who he is and the threat he may pose as a rogue toy soldier. That's another thing though. Why was Kyros allowed to act independently? Well, to put it bluntly, it's because Sugar effed up. Constructing toy slaves with magical fruit powers is not as simple as it may sound, and in fact it involves entering into a legal process of contract negotiation. I will say that the contractual aspect of this power is left deliberately vague by Oda, which is very counterintuitive to the purpose of a contract, which is to remove all of the vagity. And unfortunately, the best explanation we have of a contract actually comes from the Tontata Leo. And because we're talking about contracts, I do need to quote him precisely. Normally, people turned into toys are put under a contract that turns them into helpless laborers. But the captain was the first in the land to be turned into a toy, and Sugar made a terrible mistake. She forgot about the contract. It was her first and only mistake 10 years ago that created the only toy in this land who can fight back against the Don Quixote family. And so the captain has fought for 10 long years. Reading that back, I'm surprised that Leo gets so many words wrong, but he perfectly enunciates Don Quixote family. And I know that some people don't like how the Tontatas sound in English, but trust me, they sound just as annoying in Japanese. Also, at this point, I would say that the word contract is a bit misleading because the actual situation plays out as follows. goes. You, as a potential toy candidate, get called in for a meeting with your new employer Sugar, who offers you a contract for a lifetime of slavery. Now, because you're quite on the ball and not so sure about this slavery business, you then turn to your attorney, who, as it turns out, is also Sugar, and she says, "Mate, I think this is one pretty sweet aff deal," and she then proceeds to sign the contract for you. And then bam, you are an eternal toy. All it requires is Sugar's consent, and therefore she can set literally any condition she wants, which initially sounds quite infallible, but you've got to choose your words very, very carefully when making a contract. For example, you should choose to use words period, which is exactly what Sugar didn't do with Kyros. She, quote, forgot to make a contract when transforming him, which I have to say is rather ironic given the forgetful nature of her powers. And this is actually massive if you're a toy, because one painfully weird specific condition to Sugar's powers is that she only has one opportunity to forge the contract. If Sugar forgets or miswords the contract, then too bad, it's already been done and it cannot be amended. And these loopholes have been taken advantage of by other toys. For example, Esther's husband found a loophole that allowed him to express his identity to his former wife who had forgotten him. Although I will say this loophole, it didn't get him very far. In fact, it got him quite literally thrown in the bin. But this is still an example of why you need to be super careful with your wording. Another loophole example comes from Onipoko, who was able to express his identity on the condition that someone else asked for it. And as it turns out, Onipoko was actually a man named Milo, which you can see written proudly on his shirt. And when he got turned back into a toy, the back of his shirt also read, "Not Onipoko." So Milo will probably be struggling with identity issues for the rest of his life. But also, this is Milo's wife, and look, I'm just gonna say it, this dude is punching way up. And it should serve as a beacon of inspiration to everyone in this world who thinks that they're not attractive enough. We do also have examples of Sugar forging the contract, but it only serves to make things more confusing. For example, "Thou shalt not harm humans. Thou shalt obey the family's orders." That's it, that's the contract. Seems simple, but simplicity is very abusable, in particular with obeying the Don Quixote family. This means that every individual toy is going to be subject to living under unique conditions depending on what commands have been given to them by the rather large family. And we haven't even gotten to the immortality yet, or more accurately, the eternal youth. Because the thing that's so sought after by all of those who want to abuse the Ope Ope no Mi is actually a mere side effect of the Hobby Hobby no Mi. Thematically, I suppose this is to preserve the childlike nature and theming of the fruit. And in fact, Sugar herself is actually 22 years old. And Oda did once draw an image of what Sugar would look like had she not consumed the fruit. However, Sugar ate the Hobby Hobby no Mi when she was 10 years old, so 12 years ago, which happens to be the exact same year that Luffy accidentally consumed the Gomu Gomu no Mi, meaning that this one year produced 2 eternal fruit children. My question is, what happens if an adult eats the fruit? Do they just stop aging at whatever age they are, say, I don't know, 33? Or do they actually revert back to the body of a child? Because the latter would fit the theme of the fruit much better. And something that often gets looked over is that Sugar essentially grants eternal youth to her toy slaves as well, which is quite the hellish combination, ensuring the idea that the eternal child requires eternal toys, and that there is very little hope that over time you will be freed, because Sugar doesn't age and neither do you. So you're just locked forever into this static state of slavery. And after a while, the concept of time would probably begin to lose all meaning. But there is hope, just one. The obvious weakness to the Hobby Hobby no Mi is being scared by Usopp making a very weird face, which knocked Sugar unconscious twice, and thus released everyone under the toy curse. And this has led to a bit of a common belief that fruit powers vanish if their users are rendered unconscious. But what happened here is actually a very irregular fruit effect. To illustrate, when Rob Lucci lost consciousness, he remained in his hybrid Zoan form. The fruit didn't deactivate. Or for a Paramecia example, Brulee's Mirror World remained active when she was rendered unconscious, and perhaps the best example is when Gecko Moria was knocked unconscious briefly by Nightmare Luffy. However, the shadows remained within their respective zombie bodies, hereafter known only as Zombodies. In fact, it's very difficult to think of another example where being knocked out actually cancelled out a Devil Fruit effect. I mean, I guess there was Doflamingo with the birdcage, so I've immediately done that. And I'm sure that there are a ton of others out there, and plenty of you are no doubt going to actually in the comments, so I look forward to reading them. But for the most part, I still insist that this is a very irregular fruit effect. And the reason why Sugar is subject to this weakness is purely because of story. There are very few solutions to this problem that work well for our wacky pirate comic. For example, killing Sugar may have the desired effect, but it's a little bit morbid. And actually, there's no guarantee that that would even work, given that we've recently learned that Boa Hancock's fruit powers will not revert even if she dies. So we can't kill Sugar for many reasons, and we also can't convince her to change the toys back by her own volition. So I suppose we could dunk her in seawater and see what happens, but the exact effects of water on Devil Fruit users is another great inconsistency of One Piece. So really, this convoluted and hilarious Usopp solution was the only real one. A very bizarre weakness, business, but one that freed thousands of slaves that Sugar had been acquiring over the last 10 years. But even then, the Hobby Hobby no Mi is stupidly powerful, incorporating the most coveted elements of multiple devil fruits into one very disturbing magical fruit package. The Straw Hats have killed people in One Piece, and today not just one but 4 Straw Hats are going to stand trial for their alleged crimes. One Piece tends to have this very squeaky clean reputation when it comes to killing, because nobody dies in One Piece except for when they do, and when they do, they're never killed by our innocent protagonists except for when they are. So something that Luffy makes very clear at every available opportunity is that he is not a hero. He's a pirate, and that goes for the rest of the crew as well. They are not heroes. Murder is not above the Straw Hats. Or is it below? Is murder below them? Murder is not beneath the Straw... I don't know. We're gonna begin. This is why I don't improvise. And first to stand trial is the swordsman, Roronoa Zoro. He stands accused of kill murdering the original Mr. 7 of Baroque Works prior to the series beginning. When it comes to Mr. 7, the One Piece Wiki has very carefully chosen their words for his article, where it states that he died on duty when he attempted to forcefully recruit Roronoa Zoro, which is a bit like writing a news article after you've been warned by the legal team not to say anything about the event. Our reports state that the victim died in the same room as Zoro was in at the time. Mr. 7's corpse was covered in cuts, Zoro's swords were slathered in blood, and a message was left stating, "I, Roronoa Zoro, killed this dude," and there's a big bloody arrow pointing to the body of Mr. 7. So with all of the available evidence, we can only conclude that Mr. 7 passed away whilst on duty somehow. To be fair, the Viz translation very much sanitizes this event as well. In chapter 190, Mr. 1 states, "You're that pirate hunter who took out Mr. 7, right?" And then Zoro confronts Mr. 1's vagueness with vagueness of his own. "Instead of agreeing to my demand, he attacked me, so I dealt with him." It's all very mafia speak. Take him out, deal with him. However, this is disputed by Viz itself. Current official translator Stephen Paul, prior to commencing his employment, did his own fan translations of the first 53 volumes of One Piece. And in his unofficial official translation, not only does Mr. 1 accuse Zoro of killing Mr. 7, but he further states that Zoro killed the 100 bounty hunters at Whiskey Peak, which puts us in a bit of a weird position, because 99% of the time what the official says is law. But this is the official translator speaking, just in a non-official capacity. What we definitely know is that Mr. 1 was slightly exaggerating, because we know that Vivi, Igaram, Miss Monday, and Mr. 9 survived, so at most, Zoro could only have killed 96 bounty hunters, including Mr. Beans, a small child. Although what I will say for it is that Luffy's actions would make a lot more sense if this was the case. Luffy wakes up, sees 96 bodies scattered about, and then outright states that he is going to kill Zoro, or states that Zoro is going to die, I guess. So I guess we could accuse Luffy of attempted murder here, but we'll get to the captain in a bit because he's accused of some very, very serious crimes as well. With Zoro though, the only one we can 100% prove is Mr. 7, because he's officially deceased, with the cause of death being noted as very Zoro related, and the Netflix live action adaptation went as far as to show Zoro literally chopping Mr. 7 into pieces and then stuffing him in a big old bag. There's reasonable doubt with the bounty hunters though, because even if Stephen Paul's translation is correct, we're still taking the word of Mr. 1 here. Crocodile could have heard about the failure at Whiskey Peak, had everyone killed, and told his agents, "Whoa, it was that nasty sword guy, not me, your boss who loves you." But Zoro's not completely off the hook yet. In chapter 909, Zoro reveals that he's familiar enough with blood that he can even smell it from quite the great distance, particularly on the magistrate, presumably after he had bathed after murdering that guy. But these are quite ominous words as he proceeded to slice open the Wano magistrate with a seppuku knife. And this is another one that's disputed because later on Zoro was referred to as the magistrate murderer in a poor quality fan translation. However, Viz just states it's the guy that sliced up the magistrate, leaving it very vague. The dispute arises because the exact term in Japanese is kiri, the key portion being the kanji for beheading, kill, or murder. However, when combined with the ri, is dulled down a bit to mean cut. So I had to go and ask Arta from the Library of Ohara about this, and he said that the way it's written tends to imply an assassination. However, it doesn't necessarily mean it was a successful assassination. So look, I think that Zoro may have gotten away with this one, but how many more people can Zoro be accused of killing? Well, no more people, but I'd say about 15 to 30 more fish people. In chapter 73, Arlong returns to find the vast majority of his crew on the floor. And in the next chapter, Arlong accuses Zoro of, quote, slaughtering my men, which certainly does paint quite the vivid picture of kill murder. However, look, in English, slaughter can be used in a way that doesn't necessarily mean kill as well. Like, say a sports team loses their sports match, but they lose it by like a lot. You could say that they got slaughtered. However, Hachan then walks in and says, I'd never let anyone kill my mates, which is very Australian of him, and he also adds, I'd have scuppered that blasted pirate hunter, because early Viz had this obsession with using very florid piratey language. But the way that both Arlong and Hachan talk about it is as if Zoro did stroll in and kill like 15 to 30 fishmen, then decided to relax on a chair surrounded by their corpses, which compared to his Whiskey Peak allegations does sound like a more relaxing day, I suppose. However, the bodies of the fishmen are lacking any sort of damage. To the best of what I can see, not a single one of them is even slashed, not visibly anyway. And that's important because the slashing is the thing it is that Zoro does. So to kill them, he would have had to do something like I was honestly going to say drown them, but that wouldn't work. Something less messy though. And this one's difficult because Arlong implies that Zoro killed his men, and then Hachan removes all ambiguity by using the word kill. And of course we do have bodies, a lot of bodies. So with what we have, I think that Zoro has to be found guilty. Take him away, someone. And next up on the stand is Nico Robin, who I believe has already publicly pled guilty. However, on the advice of her legal team, has decided to investigate the matter regardless. Our major piece of evidence for this Nico Robin crime comes from chapter 218, where Robin briefly explains her backstory. A child can't live on the high seas alone. I survived by joining various outlaw gangs. As a result, I became an expert in operating in the shadows. And when Usopp asks what Robin's specialty is, she replies, assassination. But here's the thing, right? This was a very intimidating and kind of spooky line to hear at the time. But after having gotten to know Robin a lot more, I think this might just be her dark sense of humor. Because all the evidence we have suggests that Robin always goes out of her way not to kill people. Like Igaram on Whiskey Peak, who could only have survived due to Robin's intervention. Or rescuing Luffy on Alabasta, Robin doesn't even like it when other people try to kill people. And even though her clutch attacks are incredibly brutal, they never kill anyone. The person who probably had it the worst was Spandam when Robin broke his back whilst they were sailing away from Enies Lobby, but even Spandam survived. And the fact that it was Spandam is actually important, which is something I never thought I would say, but in this case, it's very relevant when it comes to canon power scaling. Spandam was rated at 9 Doriki, which is weaker than the average Marine who has a power level of 10 Doriki. So if Spandam is surviving the worst of Robin's attacks, then so is everyone else. The only evidence we have that Robin has ever killed someone is her own word, which may or may not have been a joke, and I cannot convict based on that. Going into this video, I thought that Robin was one of the 2 Straw Hats that were surefire convictions, but Nico Robin has been found not guilty. Come to think of it, One Piece has had a lot of characters that claim to be assassins, but then we never see any evidence to back up that claim. And really, can you even be an assassin without having assassined someone? It's like claiming to be a painter without even having done your first painting. There's only one character in the series who can claim to be an assassin, and that is Rob Lucci, who, as a bit of a coming of age moment when he hit 13, killed 500 hostages, and who is said to be the strongest, most cold-blooded killer in the history of CP9. But he's a bad man, a very bad man, so we expect that of him. Who we don't expect it from is Nami, who I must now ask to take the stand. Nami isn't above killing people, and killing people isn't below her either. She's like right in the middle. No, she's below the killing. I don't understand my own metaphors. Nami gets used a lot as comic relief, but she had a real rough childhood and came to terms with the world that she grew up in. And there's at least one moment in the series where Nami has stated a serious intention to kill someone. That would be during chapter 88, where she states the intention to kill Arlong. The chapter is even titled Die with like 3 exclamation marks. It's a lot. Although maybe it's just German for thee, and Nami was saying thee, Arlong thee.
The Bart. The.
Fair enough though, that's Arlong. I'm not here to argue morals, but I take zero issue with Nami wanting to kill the person who killed her mother. But what about all of the people who never got the chance to kill Belmer? Such as in chapter 8, where we have our introduction to Nami tricking 3 of Buggy's crew members onto her boat, which was deliberately planted to take advantage of weather that would subsequently capsize the ship. Nami even celebrated, as her prediction was spot on, and she left all 3 of them to drown. So I believe the amount of time a person can survive in water water alone is dependent on the temperature, but whatever the temperature is, it tends to be not long. And if Zoro hadn't come along, these three dudes would be finished. So I would be very willing to convict Nami on attempted murder, but that is far from her most grievous charge. For that, we move to episode 61, where we have Eric the Whirlwind stowing away aboard the Going Merry. And after revealing himself, Nami deliberately knocks Eric into the waters of Reverse Mountain. Now, due to the nature of fictional pirates, just knocking someone into the water isn't an immediate death sentence, as we've seen, which is also why we're not examining Usopp's actions in chapter 367, where he shot a marine into the waters of Aqua Laguna. However, I suppose that a decent legal defense could be that these were the actions of Sogeking, and Usopp probably has an alibi elsewhere. But it's important to note in this, the Nami case, that Eric the Whirlwind was a Devil Fruit user, and he was knocked into some of the roughest waters of Reverse Mountain with no one else in sight to save him. And even if someone else was in sight, who would do it? If you watched the anime, this dude is 100% dead. And Nami quite gleefully kills him as well because she even waves bye-bye afterwards. The key word in that phrase being anime though. Eric is not a canon character, even though his filler story is weaved into canon events. And there's also some question as to whether or not he's actually dead, which to be honest, I don't think anyone but me has ever asked this question, but here we are. Because Eric does reappear in One Piece, the great hidden treasure of the Nanatsu Islands. Best known as the game to feature Simon and the Simon Pirates as its main antagonists. Eric does appear in that. But in the hierarchy of canon, it goes manga, maybe anime, and then here games, way down here. You can't even see it. That's how irrelevant the games are. So in the case of Nami, whilst her killer intent is on full display in both canon and non-canon material, my ruling is that even if she did kill Eric in the anime, non-canon characters are beyond our jurisdiction to judge. So we'd best move on to the boss of this crime cohort, Monkey D. Luffy. And Luffy's crowning accusation comes most recently from chapter 1049, where he stands accused of killing Emperor of the Sea, Kaido. And Luffy did this via one of the most surefire ways to kill someone possible, which is to punch them into a vat of underground magma. And Kaido's fate here was handled quite mysteriously in the manga. All we see is this silhouette of him in the magma, with a figure next to him which was potentially thought to be Big Mom, but could also have been Kaido's clothing that had come off in all the commotion. And let's be real, unintentional nudity, probably the least of his worries in this moment. But I was very curious to see how the anime would adapt this, because they don't have that same luxury of silhouettes. And for the purposes of Luffy's trial, this is very good news, because the way Toei portrayed it is that Kaido fell into the magma and then nothing happened. They just show him sinking into this very thin magma, as if Luffy had just playfully pushed Kaido into a pool. He's not burning, disintegrating, or seemingly in any discomfort whatsoever. In fact, if he did die from this position, then it would be from asphyxiation rather than having his body violently burnt up by all of the magma. And shortly after this episode aired, we saw a significant market impact on Sakazuki stocks, which saw a stunning decline after everyone realized that apparently magma is completely harmless. Funnily enough, in this case, there's also an enduring question of whether or not Kaido killed Luffy. Before the Gear 5th reveal happens, Momonosuke says that he can't hear Luffy's voice anymore. Trafalgar Law then says the same thing. Straw Hat's voice has vanished. Which, as a quick side note to this side note, is a fascinating thing for Mr. Law to say, considering he's not a user of the voice of all things, at least not one that we know of. And then the drums of liberation happen, aka Luffy's heart restarts. So at this point, I guess it's technically possible that Luffy was technically dead and then the fruit awakened. But as for the matter of killing Kaido, I can't figure out if we even have a victim, so Luffy is currently not guilty. But this Luffy man, he still has 3 more counts to deal with, the last of which may be the most horrific acts that we've ever seen from a member of this crew. In chapter 533, Luffy very clearly kicked and punched and pushed and other assorted actions a whole ton of Impel Down guards into the flames of the blazing hell. So with Kaido surviving being pushed into magma, at least we know that he's the strongest creature in the world and has very unnaturally high resistance. These guys, they don't have that. And we're not talking playful anime flames either. To set the stage, the prisoners say, "Hey, don't do it, you can't kill us," before they get thwacked into the blazing hells. At which point the prisoners proceed to scream, "I'm burning," before the voices fade away and we never see them again. So when Luffy smacks the Impel Down guards into the blazing hells, it's about as close to a guaranteed death as one can get. But at the same time, it's never good to make assumptions. In fact, while I was researching this video, one of my favorite things has been reading comments from people making their assumptions with zero evidence. Like Giovanni on Quarter, who said, "I would estimate this. Luffy, 20,000 people. How? Marines he has knocked off into treacherous waters, and any normal water alike. Impel Down's lava that instantly kills you. Water 7 has no need to explain. Dressrosa, he killed hundreds of Dofi's lower downs, and he has killed a lot more. A normal person cannot survive being flown 300 m through the air. Upvote if you agree. And it does have 2 upvotes, so at least one other person does agree with Giovanni because I'm convinced that the other is himself. But because this is One Piece, I can see the Impel Down Guard surviving. Or more accurately, because I didn't see them overtly dying, I think that Luffy is gonna get lucky on this count. Meanwhile, in chapter 756, Luffy blows a hole clean through one of Sugar's headcracker dolls. And what we need to keep in mind is that these dolls were created out of people, and having toy bodies does not make them disposable, quite the opposite. The 2 forms carry over, which we can see with Gyros. He was missing a leg when he got turned into a toy, and so the soldier was also missing a leg. So Luffy, having blown the stomach right out of this headcracker, has potentially Sakazuki'd 2 whole people, because the breakdown of the headcrackers is that each one of them is made up of 8 people, and 2 whole people serve as the body. So if anything, Luffy has caused far more damage than Sakazuki did to Ace, and very potentially killed up to 2 people with this attack. But as likely as that is, I can't say it's confirmed either. Here's something that is confirmed though. One Piece Movie 6, Baron Omatsuri and the Secret Island. Still to this day the darkest One Piece movie, which chronicles the crew splitting apart, and Luffy losing each of them one by one, at one stage assumed to be dead. And at the very end of the film, Luffy cracks in anger that we have never seen before, and properly finishes Baron Omatsuri with a St. Charles-esque punch where all of the color vanishes. In fact, this film was almost certainly the inspiration for that punch because it came out in 2005, and Charlos being hit wasn't animated until 2009. The difference is that in this film, Luffy's punch kills Baron Omatsuri. We hear his last thoughts, lamenting the death of his crew and such, and then Omatsuri himself passes away. It's a pretty brutal ending to an equally as brutal film, where Luffy unequivocally takes a life. So I would rule him guilty. However, again, non-canon material is outside of our jurisdiction, and in the end, the 3 characters that have killed are our OG3, Luffy, Zoro, and Nami. However, the only one unable to escape the canon charges was Zoro. So jail for him and, I don't know, a low-budget mandatory after-work pizza party for the rest. I'm pretty sure that's how court works. And if you want more, then please do hit the subscribe button for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed. The Straw Hats have killed again! Today in Fictional Pirate Court, we will be trying 4 to 5 more Straw Hats for their alleged life-ending deeds, including one case that required multiple translations and adaptations to solve. So get this right, there is a character in One Piece who, depending on what you've read or watched and how you read or watched it, was either viciously kill-murdered by a Straw Hat or not. And that's a bit of a problem because both outcomes exist in official media. This is quite the legal conundrum. However, we're going to start by calling Nico Robin to the stand again, because in the previous video, Nico Robin was tried and acquitted of all charges, and this was met with some controversy in the comments, with further accusations such as, I am a first responder, and I can say with 100% confidence that Luffy and Robin have killed the vast majority of people they have fought. And I want to say that I agree to an extent. If any of what Robin did happened to a real person, then they would be 100% dead. But this is One Piece, where birds survive nukes, so we can't really implement real-world standards. However, with that said, I don't know if it's looking too good for Robin because some fantastic cases were brought to the court's attention. And we will begin with the following. You forgot Robin killed Black Moria. So I imagine that that was a typo and the commenter meant to say Black Maria instead of conjuring the image of Black Moria in my mind brain. However, actually this comment is kind of on point, because before we get to Black Maria, we actually need to charge Robin on a count against Gecko Moria, because this altercation is significantly more vicious than I had remembered. To set the scene, the Straw Hats are fighting Oars. Oars, he's very big, and the Straw Hats, they're all very small, so it's a bit of a problem. But then another problem because Gecko Moria decides to pilot his meat mech, and Robin sees an opportunity to solve the Oars problem by getting rid of Gecko Moria. So she does one of her classic clutch formations, and as it's about to happen, Usopp speaks up and encourages murder by saying, yeah, keep going, Robin, break his neck. Usopp revealing his raw bloodlust there, and as Robin performs the requested act of murder, Usopp and Nami both celebrate after they see Moria's neck broken. In this moment, the Straw Hats are celebrating what they believe to be Robin killing someone. It's quite the surreal moment to look at. These are our heroes, everyone. However, Moria did survive by switching places with Doppelman. However, if he didn't have that ability, all evidence points to the idea that Robin would have flat out killed a warlord of the sea right then and there. And this is exactly why the world government tried to have him killed after Marineford. They were right. If a Warlord of the Sea can be beaten by pre-time skip Robin, then he is too weak. I guess he wasn't beaten, and they also didn't kill him, so maybe he's not too weak. Maybe they made a mistake. But with this evidence, I do think we could convict Robin on one count of attempted murder because she was definitely gunning for that outcome. It was precise and calculated, and furthermore, you know what? We're also going to convict Usopp as a potential accessory to attempted murder. I don't think you can convict on the word potential, but we've done it now, and we can't undo it. That's the fictional pirate legal system. But the big problem is that Robin's powers, they're very inconsistent in how deadly they look versus how deadly they actually turn out to be. So this attack that was supposed to kill Gekko Moria, that's great, but we've seen similar attacks actually be even more powersome attacks that did not succeed in killing their targets. The most problematic Robin attacks are the vague ones. And with that, I should say that we received a number of allegations regarding Robin killing Black Maria during the raid on Onigashima. In fact, this was by far the most common allegation we received. And it's a tricky one. Robin fights are always brutal just via the nature of her powers, and Black Maria was the recipient of a very unenvious honor, which was to have the very first grand jacuzzi clutch performed on her, which looks like Robin is snapping all kinds of body parts, including Black Maria's neck. It's quite graphic because we see Black Maria's eyes go white, indicating either unconsciousness or a departure from this mortal realm. And I use such dramatic language because Robin herself claims right before performing it that, quote, "I can be a demon if I have to," and demons are not typically known for all of the mercy it is that they take on their victims. With the manga alone, I'm not convinced. And I suspect that most of the Black Maria death believers come from the anime. And you know, one of the common themes of this video, nay, this trial, is going to be times that the anime makes these events look a lot more gruesome than they did in the manga. And in this case, there are certain close-ups of Black Maria in the anime that make this attack look like one of the most torturous things that the human body could possibly endure. Look at her, she's not having a good time. And when Robin does finally put her out of her misery and the abstract break occurs, we go from Black Maria in light to her body falling motionless into the darkness. Which, if I didn't know One Piece, I would certainly say is implying that we've gone from a state of life to a state of death. But I do know One Piece, and it's not necessarily implying that. This incident takes me back to the Spandam event at Enies Lobby. There, Nico Robin broke his back in an incredibly visceral and not at all nice looking way. However, even Spandam survived, and I say even Spandam, because he is, in the only canonical method of power scaling that One Piece has, Doriki, officially weaker than the average Marine. So if Spandam can survive an attack like this, then so can any average Marine, and so can Black Maria. Also, nobody ever says that Black Maria is dead. In fact, we don't know the fates of any of the Tobiroppo, not even Drake at the moment. What's happening with Drake? And given that, this is One Piece and people can survive literally anything so long as no one says or shows that they've died, I have no choice but to find Robin not guilty on the count of killing Black Maria. To summarize Robin though, even though we can't get any of the murder charges to stick, there's just not enough evidence, she certainly doesn't seem to take issue with the concept of killing. As presented, she seemed fully prepared to remove Gekko Moria from existence, but we're also forgetting the much more obvious attempted assassination of Iceberg on Water 7. Although that gets slightly confusing as well, because Iceberg, he's attacked twice across 2 nights. The first attack from Robin was never intended to kill him. It was to get Nico Robin's name out there and put suspicion onto the Straw Hats. However, the very next night, Blueno ordered Robin to kill Iceberg, and honestly, I believe that she would have done it. At this point, Robin thought that her life was over, and she would have made whatever sacrifice necessary to ensure the safety of the Straw Hats. So I guess it's more of a noble assassination if such a thing exists. But look, we've spoken about Robin. The other Straw Hats, not much better. Because we have a wild scenario coming up next. One that I was blissfully unaware of until the flood of comments came in from the last video. We here at the Department of Fictional Pirate Justice received a lot of allegations regarding the murder of Satori. Now, if you don't remember Satori, I don't blame you. He was one of Enel's priests, quite specifically the one who enjoyed playing with his balls, who was defeated by Luffy and Sanji, and Usopp was also there, but he didn't really contribute, which, good for him, because it means that he's not on the stand today. And Luffy and Sanji dealt with Satori in a bit of a brutal way, admittedly. Luffy essentially tied him with, himself, thus restraining Satori, so that Sanji could deliver the alleged killing blow, which was his concusse. Now, we don't confirm a kill from this scene alone. It's actually much later down the line when we see Satori's siblings, Hotori and Kotori. No one asked them to, but they decided to rock up and attack the Straw Hats as retribution. But personally, I've never thought that Satori was dead. If I did, then it would have been in the previous video. And that's because I'm more familiar with the manga. That's a version of One Piece I've gone over the most. And what the sibling says is, "How dare you bring down our big bro? You'll pay for what you did to our brother Satori." However, I then checked episode 171 of the anime, and I have to admit, I was shook. because the official subtitles have Hotori and or Kotori saying, "How dare you kill our brother Satori?" So all of a sudden, I understand where all of the Satori killing allegations come from. But here's the thing, just because one English translation says kill doesn't mean that it's correct. Mistakes like this are made all the time no matter what the official translation is. So I needed to check that this was consistent. So I did a thing I don't usually do and watched the English dub of this episode, and Hotori and or Kotori, I don't care who, but again, one of them says that the Straw Hats killed Satori. Now that's interesting because that's two translations now, and it's starting to make me wonder if, I don't know, maybe it's the Viz translation that's wrong, and maybe they were just trying to soften the language, because this is back before the Stephen Paul day, which if you're not a fan of the official translation now, you really would not have been a fan of it back then. And maybe they were just trying to soften the language. And it was in this fateful moment that the wise words of a subscriber popped into Liam's mind brain. I wish he didn't rely on translations, but looked at the actual Japanese text words. That's it! I should look at the Japanese text words. And I actually do own One Piece in Japanese for situations exactly like this. And what we're looking at is volume number, this one. That should give you an indication of just how bad my Japanese is. But I did contact the Library of Ohara, who speaks far better Japanese text words than myself, and what's literally being said here is, "How dare you" with Satori, conveniently leaving the verb right out of the middle of that sentence. So the action is implied, which is a problem because it relies on us knowing the implication. But you know what? The answer to this actually lies at the end of Skypiea. And from here, the situation becomes even more difficult to litigate, because the anime and the manga branch apart even further. In the manga, after Enel is defeated, the Shandians gather Enel's vassals and sentence them to be set adrift on clouds, which is the Sky version of setting people adrift on a raft, and a rather brutal punishment because it implies that they may or may not starve to death, depending on how quickly they can find another sky island to land on whilst adrift. And we do see in this very same chapter close-ups of all the defeated vassals, Shura, Giratsu, and our boy Satori, which implies that they've been captured and are alive and shortly to be set adrift. However, this series of panels is very deceptive, as we do know for a fact that Giratsu wasn't caught because he fell through the clouds, and this shot of him must have been currently falling through said clouds. Also, a side note, a lot of people were very quick to raise allegations of Chopper having murdered Giratsu, but in case you don't know, in the manga cover stories, as I said, Giratsu falls through the clouds, lands on the ground, and builds a hot springs resort with Koza's uncle, which he still manages to this very day. So this shot of Giratsu in the manga is kind of unreliable, or at least I think it gives you the wrong impression. So what does that mean for the shot of Satori? Does that make that unreliable? Either way, I do think the manga goes out of its way to show that Satori is still alive and therefore not dead. Now as for the anime, again, that's a different story. The crazy thing is that in the anime, this shot of the priest isn't included. It was never adapted and we skip right past it, which probably reinforces the impression that Satori is dead to anime-only watchers because neither he nor any of the priests appear again. So we actually kind of have to split this case up. In the manga murder trial of Satori, the ball guy, Luffy and Sanji are found not guilty. However, in the anime adaptation of this trial, specifically the English subs and dubs of this trial, according to all of the available evidence, Luffy and Sanji did restrain and murder this dude via blunt force trauma to the head. So it's not looking good for anime Luffy, but General Luffy's legal troubles are far from over. In chapter 979, Luffy stealthily infiltrates Onigashima, preparing for the raid, when he catches sight of some beast pirate members wasting delicious oshiruko, or red bean soup, and thinking of Tama starving, Luffy then proceeds to conjure a Gear 3rd elephant gun and flatten one of the guys like a pancake. If this was real life, his skull would have been caved in. And it's actually even more brutal in the anime, because they have this shot looking at Luffy from below standing over the guy, and he's been flattened to such a degree that you can't even really tell him apart from all the debris on the floor. If this was any other series, I, Judge, would issue a guilty verdict to Luffy right here and now. I mean, it doesn't get more obviously kill murdery than this. However, it does lack some very important context. One is that, again, no one ever says that Luffy killed this guy, and in One Piece in particular, that's very important. If no one confirms the death, then Oda can always do something to weasel his way out of it. And secondly, we're kind of ignoring what Luffy's powers had become to this point. So here's how Oda weasels his way out of this occasion. Throughout One Piece, Luffy's abilities have been slowly unlocking, which eventually culminates in the full-on Toon powers of Gear 5th. So my explanation for Red Bean Soup Guy would be that Luffy's so close to unlocking it at this point that he's already able to manipulate people without knowing it. And that this guy, man, look, he absolutely got hurt, but even on this extreme occasion, I don't think we can make murder stick, and I'm forced to find our captain not guilty. The burden of proof for murder murder is just so much higher in the One Piece world, but we did actually manage it in the last video. In our previous installments, Luffy was actually found guilty of killing Baron Omatsuri from movie 6. However, he was acquitted due to it being non-canon and therefore not within our jurisdiction. You've got to go to movie court for that. However, we have also received a flood of concerning allegations of Luffy's past, spawning from One Piece movie 6, Dead End Adventure, which is a movie that I actually really like it. It's one of the older ones that's actually worth watching. And the climax of the film features Luffy facing off against a former Marine Vice Admiral with a candy Logia fruit. It's a pretty epic fight because one, it takes place on a sinking ship at sea. And it sounds weird, but even though One Piece is a pirate manga, we almost never have fights taking place at sea. There's a storm, the ship is sinking rapidly. It's like One Piece in its purest element, which we almost never have. But this fight ends with Luffy covering himself in flour and then hitting Gaspard with a Gomu Gomu no Bazooka right into a horrifyingly huge cyclone. And much in the same way that Eric the Whirlwind would have almost certainly died after being knocked into the waters of Reverse Mountain as a Devil Fruit user, I would argue that Gaspard was not getting out of that cyclone alive. However, unlike Baron Omatsuri, there is no confirmation of Gaspard's death. It's very Team Rocket blasting off again. And even if there was confirmation, again, it's not canon, so there's only so much that this court will be able to do. So once more, the court will note that Luffy is a very naughty boy, but he's acquitted of this charge as well. Although I do want it noted that movie Luffy is a shade more vicious than actual series Luffy, because sure, these days he's knocking all sorts of dragons into all sorts of volcanoes, but this movie was made back in the more innocent times of just knocking people onto the floor. And now we have another shocking turn of events as I must call Tony Chopper to the stand. So this one, I'm honestly a bit surprised we need to go over, but my god, this department received such a massive influx of comments, so here we are. This is the trial that we apparently need. Tony Chopper stands accused of killing Dr. Hiruluk by a truly absurd amount of people. So I assume that we all know this story pretty well, or at least that's what I thought before I saw all of these comments. To cure his mentor, Chopper went and found a poisonous mushroom that he thought would help. It was a very sweet mix-up, one that ever so many of you in the comments seem to want Chopper to suffer life in prison for manslaughter for. And to that I say, stop that. Although it is a very interesting situation. Really, what Chopper did was provide the filling of a death sandwich. Hiruluk was already dying from his disease, and he then purposely consumed the mushroom that Chopper brought him, and finally he blew himself up in front of Wapol's castle. Hiruluk was stacking deaths, and he may hold the record for most consecutive things to kill a man. Of course, the argument can also be made that Hiruluk never died because we've never forgotten him, and therefore, even in the worst case scenario, Chopper could not be found guilty. Which it definitely isn't the worst case scenario, by the way. I have no idea why so many of you were quick to convict Chopper, especially when it was Hiruluk himself who made the decision to consume the mushroom, and especially when we should be looking more at Hiruluk's actions in general. We could very potentially try Dr. Hiruluk himself for attempted murder, because in chapter 141, he literally shoots some dude's wife, and then their child even comes in screaming. It's a horrible situation, even if Hiruluk says it's just a quote, knockout shot. So you know what? Hiruluk better hope that no one remembers him, because if they haven't forgotten, then he's not dead, and therefore liable to be put on trial for assault with a firearm at the very least. But to round out this trial, Robin, Anime Luffy, and Anime Sanji are going to join Zoro in jail. Robin for the attempted murder of Gecko Moria, Anime people for the brutal murder of the anime ball guy. Our friend Usopp is going to be sentenced to community service for being an accessory. Meanwhile, Manga Luffy, Sanji, and Chopper are going to receive 2 free passes to Wagomu Land on Skypiea as compensation for their ordeals. And as for you, you're being sentenced to subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feeds. The One Piece multiverse exists, and in particular there exists a terrifying set of alternate timeline Straw Hats. In this timeline, Oda explores what would happen if one particular event went very wrong. The Straw Hats form, then set sail into the Grand Line, at which point a devastating calamity occurs, and Oda then goes on to show us how this radically changes the future as we know it. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam, and I'm hoping that this is the good timeline version of me. If not, hey, the bad timeline isn't too terrible. I certainly can't say the same for the Straw Hats though, because Eiichiro Oda has been creating alternate timeline versions of the Straw Hats, inhabiting what I'm going to label as the Dark Universe. Some of the things that you see in this video are going to shock you. So look, rather than saying more words and things, I think that the best way to introduce you to the Dark Universe is simply to take a look at our alternate timeline Luffy. Because the good news is, Luffy is still very much alive in this universe. The bad news is, it's not much of a life. At age 40, Luffy is a rather disheveled, chubsome mess. He is unshaven, and honestly, he probably doesn't bathe a whole lot. Not that he does in the good timeline, mind you. According to Eiichiro Oda himself, Luffy only showers once a week, which is not enough, but it's definitely more than Dark Universe Luffy. More importantly, the quote we have accompanying this Luffy is, "Pirate King, don't be such a dreamer." And it gets worse, because then we skip 20 years to age 60, and Luffy is a complete senile mess of a man, balding in all but one very curious spot, and just saying, "Can I have that meat?" So at least that's consistent, but this is a really horrifying future. The best way to sum up the Dark Universe is a place where dreams come to die. In this timeline, Luffy suffered what he inflicts on all of his opponents, which is to crush their hopes and dreams, leaving them alive, but hollow and empty. And not only that, but in this universe, characters' core values are warped and perverted. And there's no better representation of perverted than Sanji. By which I mean just in general, but particularly at age 40 in our Dark timeline, Sanji has abandoned everything he believed in, growing quite overweight because his philosophy on food is now, quote, "It's all the same once it's in your stomach." To be fair, I can imagine that he's lost his sense of taste due to all of the chain smoking, which is probably going to be a problem anyway for his good universe counterpart. However, this is absolutely nothing compared to how far Sanji would fall, and this is actually one of the most interesting Dark Universe outcomes. But at age 60, Sanji basically becomes his biological father Judge. It's almost as if at some stage Sanji returns to the Germa Kingdom, and bizarrely enough actually makes Judge proud, and thus inherits the throne, the will, and of course the butt chin of Vinsmoke Judge. Sanji goes full supervillain to the point where his quote is, "Dump the poison in the sea." So Dark Universe Sanji becomes an actual antagonist. Someone that, well, traditionally in One Piece, you'd need a young Luffy type person to come along and punch fight him straight in the face hole. Here's the thing though, the Dark Universe isn't just blanket bad from the get-go. This is a universe where something along the way went very, very wrong. So there's a bit of a mystery to be solved here, and part of that answer lies in our next character. Here we have Usopp at age 40. Just as with most bad timeline characters, he appears to have gained a lot of weight, and there is very little remarkable about him whatsoever, except for what he's saying, which is, "Monkey D. Luffy, he's my underling, you know." And not only that, but Usopp at age 60, now emaciated, toothless, and looking rather homeless, is presenting a similar rambling. Because 20 years later, he's still basically saying the same thing. Roronoa Zoro, he's my underling, you know. Which presents two possible conclusions. Either this is a world where Luffy and Zoro still go on to become famous and Usopp is just lying about people he's never met, or the Straw Hats did form a crew in the Dark Universe. And look, I'm just going to spoil it right now. The second answer is the correct one, which we know by examining Nami. At age 40, she is, well, she's certainly something. From what we can tell, she's very irate and yelling, "I said, give me your money." But the most important detail is her tattoo. She is no longer bearing the symbol of the Arlong Pirates, so in this timeline, Luffy does still defeat Arlong and frees Nami, confirming that at the very least, our original crew of 5 Straw Hats get together and complete the events of East Blue. So that's not where our calamity happens, but before we get to that, you should prepare yourselves for some age 60 Nami. And at this point, Nami no longer has the, how shall we describe it, the youthful maneuverability required to be a thief, so she has turned to the world of scams. And in this image, she is trying to sell someone a, quote, magic pot. But still, how did this happen? What went so catastrophically wrong that it led to everyone abandoning all of their dreams and values? Well, for that, we need to hop on into the Grand Line. Chopper at age 40 is one of the more horrific outcomes, going from cute medical friend to a very violent rain doctor, and even worse, by age 60, he's become the monster that everyone on Drum Island actually feared he was. In fact, he's actually shouting, "Bring me the sacrifice!" Which is terrifying because it kind of implies that Chopper is just flat out murdering people or creatures, I guess. Either way, it's murder, and either way, it's unpleasant. And the kanji on his shirt says poison, or at least it's supposed to, because my artist seems to have used the kanji for lid instead, which I find hilarious. But basically, it's telling us that Chopper is now more focused on inflicting disease and pain rather than curing it. However, he also provides a great clue, because at age 40, he is saying, "Straw Hat, don't ever say that name again." So not only does Chopper know Luffy, but Luffy appears to have either betrayed or disappointed Chopper, thus more than likely destroying his faith in humanity and leading to the hulking Wendigo Chopper of the future. But the Straw Hats made it to Drum Island and recruited Chopper. So the calamity occurs after that. Or now, but potentially not too far after. One issue we run into at this point is that none of the remaining Dark Timeline Straw Hats provide clues about crew interaction, which led me to believe that the calamity of this Dark Timeline occurred on Alabasta. That all of this is the result of what would have happened if Luffy lost to Crocodile, the kingdom of Alabasta falling, and Vivi more than likely dying. The crew would have been distraught. This was their first proper global challenge, and they failed spectacularly. Not only losing a crewmate in Vivi, but also Luffy's dreams being crushed, and the crew ultimately losing faith in him. Now, the reason why I say this happened on Alabasta is actually because of Robin. She is still very much alive in the Dark Universe. Again, at what cost though? Our age 40 Robin has all but abandoned her dreams and claims to have thrown out all of her books. Meanwhile, age 60 Robin has taken an even more startling turn and is actually offering to buy a child. So Dark Timeline Robin is involved in the slave trade, and I think that makes sense because her appearance does give off some very Mother Carmel kind of vibes. She also looks like an older version of her fake Straw Hat counterpart Coco. You know, the one who offered Chopper a pickle and single-handedly created one of the most disgusting yet sexually suggestive images in all of the One Piece. But this Robin has no mention of the Straw Hat, so it's possible that she never even joined the crew. And the same can be said of Franky. Unlike everyone else, we see Franky at age 50, and he appears to have lost any and all sense of humanity. He is no longer a cyborg, he is just a full robot, and he says as much himself. I am the robot that will destroy all of the ships in the world. Because remember that Franky was traumatized when his battle Frankies were used for all of the bad things. So this Franky appears to believe that ships are a cause of evil, which is really fascinating when we look at him at age 70, because he himself, in the most radical shift of all of the Straw Hats, has actually become a ship. This is the Battle Franky 70, and unlike Battle Franky 50, he no longer retains even the shell of being human. This is the result of a full conversion from human to object. I am Battleship Franky, like a Dalek really, which is why I did the voice. It's almost like a twisted Batman though. In the Dark Universe, Franky has become the thing that he feared most. A very fascinating insight into what would have happened if he'd never met Luffy. Except there is a problem with that theory. Because the idea of the Straw Hats losing on Alabasta makes all of the sense in the world until you examine Zoro. Dark Universe Zoro is very revealing. Not so much because of anything he's saying, which for the record, at age 40 that is, wounds on the back are ouchie ouchie, which is of course a twist on his philosophy. Basically no longer concerned with shame and much more concerned with not feeling pain. But the biggest and most interesting part of alternate timeline Zoro is that he still has a scar on his left eye, which is absolutely massive because it means that this Zoro trained with Mihawk during the 2-year time skip. So whatever calamity happened to the Straw Hats actually happens after the time skip, which in retrospect is also echoed by Usopp, who at both age 40 and 60 is wearing his headphones, an accessory that he only acquired during the time skip. Before we figure out exactly what happened though, we should complete our rather unfortunate picture of Zoro. And at age 60, we have the saddest possible outcome, with Zoro on his hands and knees begging for money, which is of course an intentional parallel to Zoro begging Mihawk to train him. In this timeline, Zoro is now committing what he once believed was the most shameful possible act, just to beg for a handful of berries. As for our calamity, this actually makes things quite clear. In the post-time skip era, there aren't actually many opportunities for Luffy to have his dreams crushed. Fishman Island, Punk Hazard, and Dressrosa were never serious breaking points for Luffy, which narrows our options down to this many. The first is that Luffy fails on Whole Cake Island, but the issue here is that I don't think there's any outcome that breaks his dream. His willpower is simply too strong to be brought down by the conflict with Big Mom or even Katakuri. However, our second option is very possible, which is that Luffy loses on Wano. The Allied forces conduct the raid on Onigashima, and in this rather sickening timeline, the raid fails, which is significantly more impactful because this is the Straw Hats at full power. They gave it everything they've got, and they lost anyway. Perhaps in the Dark Universe, Luffy is never able to awaken his Devil Fruit, or maybe his Devil Fruit isn't actually special at all, meaning that he confronts Kaido at 100% of what he has, and his dreams are destroyed, much like Gecko Moria before him. It would also explain why everyone's still alive in the alternate timeline, because Kaido generally prefers not to kill his opponents. He often doesn't see the point in it because he's practically invincible, and instead he can use his former opponents to further his own desires. But the third, and in my opinion most interesting possibility, is that we have not yet encountered Luffy's breakpoint. In the Dark Universe, he can still beat Kaido but fail at the very last hurdle, which is the future conflict with Blackbeard. In the final fight to determine who becomes the Pirate King, Luffy is beaten. Blackbeard takes the crown, and the Straw Hats are left decimated, having come so far, all for nothing. And it really does put a nice cap on the whole Dark Universe name, because this is the timeline where Blackbeard becomes the undisputed ruler of all of the things. So the Straw Hats disband and retire into mediocrity, having been unable to achieve even a single one of their dreams, with Luffy in particular returning to Dawn Island to live out the rest of his days as a hollow yet husky shell of a man thing. How do I know that he goes back to Dawn Island? Well, that's because there are still 2 Dark Universe fates that we have yet to explore. The first of which is, oddly enough, Port Ghasty Ace. In this timeline, he is alive, but he seems to have retired from piracy. Very notably, he has a scar across his face, which may imply that the one who broke his dream was Whitebeard, because it's very evocative of the scar that Whitebeard gave Crocodile. And at age 40, our bizarrely bow-tied Ace is now saying, "Hey Luffy, lend me some money." So the two of them still know each other and are probably living in the same general vicinity. 20 years later, Ace is even worse off, this time begging Chopper for money, which is an interesting outcome. But more importantly, Ace is now sporting Goldie Roger's trademark mustache. So just as bad timeline Sanji became his hated father Judge, bad timeline Ace becomes his hated father Roger. And I guess the saddest thing is that Ace is only alive in this universe because he gave up on his dreams. So it feels like Ace was always in a bit of a no-win situation. Either he dies as an optimist or he lives on as a pessimist. But for someone who suffers an even worse fate, let's catch up with Sabo. In the Dark Universe, Sabo still tries to set out as a pirate and gets explodified by a world noble. But in this case, the key event here is that he is not saved by Dragon, but instead he miraculously lives on with his trademark scars and ends up becoming a noble of Dawn Island, very much mimicking not only the aesthetic of his father, Outlook III, but also his core beliefs, as Sabo is saying, anyone who isn't a noble is trash. Quite a radical shift for Sabo there, but at age 60, it all comes crashing down. What minimal fortune he has now vanished, and he's left begging for drinks. And it's heavily implied that the person he's begging is Makino because Sabo is saying, "You know Luffy, he's my little brother. He'll pay for it, so please let me have a glass." Which paints a picture where the three brothers, Ace, Sabo, and Luffy, end their days together living in relative misery on Dawn Island, with their childhood hopes and dreams being lost to the ravages of time, and probably either a big bluefish or an obese cherry pie enthusiast. What if Trafalgar Law was evil? Because that was the original plan. I mean, I say plan. In reality, everything was pretty vague. The stories of all of the supernovas were originally painted with a distinct Gaussian blur applied, but Law was one of the very few characters who had a sense of clarity. Trafalgar Law was introduced as an undeniably sinister, scheming figure, always smiling at you as if he was mentally picturing the events that would inevitably lead to your death. Law was presented as something of a puppet master, which shouldn't be surprising given his affiliation to Doflamingo. But early Law's character traits included a distinct pleasure in sowing chaos and watching others fight, such as when he was enjoying the conflict between Mad Monk Rouge and Massacre Soldier Killer. That fight was then broken up by Drake, to which Law said, "Too bad, things were just getting good. Drake, how many people have you killed?" Which isn't exactly the dialogue of your typical protagonist. And I honestly can't picture post-time skip Law saying those words. With a Jolly Roger directly referencing Doflamingo, and introduced as the quote, "surgeon of death," it was a natural conclusion to assume that Law may not be the goodest of boys. And there's actually evidence that Eiichiro Oda may have intended for Law to be an antagonist all the way up to the Punk Hazard arc. In this sketch, Sanji is being a rather clever cook, catching on to Law's true motives, to which Law replies, "You're sharp, aren't you?" with a very classic antagonistic smirk. And as we know, Law's character took a sharp protagonistic turn. As story chef, Eiichiro Oda served us a Law soup complete with morals, heroics, a tragic yet spicy mentor, and the most important ingredient was not something Oda added, but something he took away. When Law became a solid protagonist, he pretty much just stopped smiling. And I guess that makes sense because he's not an arrogant agent of chaos anymore. He's taking things very seriously, and serious people do not smile. And the really fun thing is that to justify this, Oda had to more or less create a good version of Doflamingo to serve as Law's mentor instead. Because that Doflamingo, he's a bit of a bad dude. So instead, Law was taught by his brother, Joe Flamingo. He's the good one. Later, of course, renamed Rocinante. But I can't help but wonder what may have been if we'd kept to the original plan. And to make this happen is actually a shockingly simple process. We just need to remove one ingredient from Oda's story soup, and that would be Rocinante. If we take him out of the picture, then Law is left with no one but Doflamingo as a mentor, and Rocinante's worst fears will be brought to life. "You can't turn into a monster like my brother. Get away from here, Law." But with no Rocinante, there will be no Law getaway. So how do things play out? Well, Law already has one of the more tragic backstories in the series, intentionally poisoned by his kingdom and the world government and ruthlessly exterminated, surviving only by shielding himself within the corpses of his former kingdom dwellers. It really is a solid supervillain backstory. And this experience eventually led Law to join the Don Quixote Pirates. And his reason for joining was, and I quote, "I just came to join the family so I could kill everyone and everything." And Doflamingo immediately saw potential there. Because of course he did. He is also a raving, murdering lunatic. But also because Doflamingo was described by Rocinante as born with an innately evil nature nature that knows no bounds. So child Law and adult Doflamingo actually complement each other quite well here. This is now the mentor that Law has, and so he will never be taught the true value of life and never have anyone who truly cares for him, save for maybe Baby 5 and Buffalo. And so things play out quite similarly. Law will still eat the Ope Ope no Mi because it was Doflamingo who found the fruit, not Rocinante. His family will acquire it either directly themselves or through Virgo amongst the Marines on Minion Island. However it happens doesn't matter because it will be given to Law as part of the Eternal Youth plan. And just on this, Doflamingo made his plan pretty clear to Rocinante in their final conversation. Well, if he's already eaten the Ope Ope no Mi, I'll need to raise him so that he knows to die for my sake. And that's exactly what he'll try to do. Law will probably have quite a few years up his sleeves for Doflamingo to groom this belief. However, the problem is that this is incompatible with Law's goal, which, as I will remind you, is killing everyone and everything. In fact, thinking about it, granting Doflamingo's eternal life is, dare I say, counterproductive to killing. So Law will eventually either have to confront Doflamingo or escape from the crew. And something I suppose we should note about this timeline is that Law will never meet the Heart Pirates, because he found them as a child after escaping Minion Island. But now Law has remained a Don Quixote pirate well into his teenage years. However, he can still form a crew. It's very plausible that Law could recruit his childhood friends Baby 5 and Buffalo, mostly because Baby 5 will do quite literally anything you ask, so long as you make it clear that you need her. And Buffalo is easily bribed with assorted treats like ice cream, but also because the three of them did have a connection. Baby 5 and Buffalo were both legitimately worried about Law. And funnily enough, in the canon timeline, Law and Baby 5 did go on to become allies because she's now part of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. So Baby 5's betrayal of Doflamingo at any point is very plausible because it did actually happen. So the Heart Pirates form, except you know what? They're not the Heart Pirates because that was a reference to Rocinante. And if anything, Law right now is the opposite of Rocinante's ideals here. So what is the opposite of Heart? If it were a suit of cards, I'd say maybe Spade, but we've already got the Spade Pirates. So instead, I think we'll go with the Kill Murder Pirate Squad starring Trafalgar Law. Law shall retain his brutal goal of killing everyone and everything, and of course still earn his terrifying epithet as the Surgeon of Death. But his main milestone goal is to kill Doflamingo, which eventually brings us to Sabadi, which goes down exactly as it does in the series. Because even in the canon events, Law is portrayed as evil, except instead of a bear and a penguin, Law will have a buffalo and a baby in his crew. But legitimately, nothing else needs to change about Sabadi. However, when it comes to Marineford, that is where we see a major global shift. Law watches from afar with the rest of the supernova, very in character, probably relishing in the bloodshed, like a voyeur in the corner of some sort of fictional pirate orgy. The One Piece is real, etc. However, in this timeline, Law will never join the fight, aka he will not go out of his way to save Luffy. The reason is because it was Rocinante who taught Law the true value of the D, and without Rocinante, it's just another initial. Law doesn't recognize it as anything particularly special or fatesome, so he's not going to go out of his way to save Luffy. And this means that Luffy will almost certainly die. There is an argument to be made that Shanks would have stopped Luffy being killed on the battlefield by, say, Kizaru, but the bigger problem is Luffy's existing injuries. It took a doctor of both Law's skill and Law's specific magical fruit powers to ensure that Luffy would survive. And even then, Law himself said there was no guarantee that Luffy would ever recover. So I do think that without Law's intervention, our future Pirate King becomes our current pirate corpse. Also, because I don't think I'll ever have a chance to talk about this in another video, I just want to linger on this panel of Law meeting Ivankov, because I always misread Ivankov's dialogue as, "By the way, who are you? Straw Hat's boyfriend?" And honestly, I don't think that would be out of character for Ivankov. But instead of saving Luffy, we are going to plow on with Law's plan, which he sums up as, "Now just shut your mouths and follow me. I'll take my rightful place when the time comes." He was so much more villainous than I think most of us remember. So much so that even in this hypothetical evil Law scenario, all I need to do to make him evil is cut and paste his existing dialogue. But by this time, the Kill Murder Pirate Squad will have recruited many new members, all equally as invested in doing exactly what it says on the box, and this will culminate in the Rocky Port incident, said to be masterminded by our very own Surgeon of Death. Law obtains 100 hearts from 100 non-consenting pirates. He then offers those to the world government and becomes a warlord of the sea. And this is where we encounter a very interesting twist. From here, Law will still go to Punk Hazard with the intention of being a general prick. However, we run into a newly created and very Monet-shaped problem. So Punk Hazard is always a bit confusing in the series because the timelines of when things and what things happen can be tricky to put together. But Monet is a member of the Don Quixote family. However, in the series, Law didn't know this because she joined shortly after Law left. However, in this timeline, Law didn't leave, and so he is aware of Monet's affiliation, which means he knows he cannot trust trust her or stay on Punk Hazard, because his position will be immediately reported to Doflamingo and then general bad things will occur. So to realize his plan, Law is going to need some more head-on firepower. And given that he was already thinking of making an alliance in the actual series, that probably means that he's going to seek out an alliance. The natural go-to at the time would be Eustace Kidd. He is of course the most notorious member of the worst generation still alive. However, he's already planning an alliance of his own to take down Shanks, having invited Basil Hawkins and Scratchman Apu. And that's not ideal, because what Law needs is for this alliance to focus on Kaido. If they target Shanks, Doflamingo, meaningless. He won't be touched. However, I can't say that his other options are great. At this point, Diaz Drake has already aligned himself with Kaido, and Capone Gang Beige has pledged his services to Big Mom, so they're both out. Luffy's dead, so he's out. Zoro's irrelevant, probably doing something somewhere, doesn't matter, he's out. Jewelry Bonnie gives absolutely zero craps about Law's Flamingo cause, and that really does leave us with just Mad Monk Rouge, who Law probably won't be able to find because he's spending his time hiding out in the sky. So Law really doesn't have many great options here. He can either try to take Punk Hazard and as a result the Don Quixote pirates down on his own, which will end badly, or he can try to weasel his way into the Kid Alliance and hope for the best. But look, I'm gonna be blunt here. Either way, it has the same outcome. Let's say he joins the Kid Alliance. Great. That alliance is abruptly broken by the arrival of Kaido from the sky, who I prefer to call Skydo. But Skydo will land on the ground and become Kaido once more, and then even with Law to help defend, this alliance is being easily defeated again. And because Kaido is an ally of Doflamingo, inevitably Law will find himself captured and taken to Dressrosa. For a very dark take on the Dressrosa arc, because from here one of two things can happen. Either Law acquiesces and performs the surgery on Doflamingo, thus killing Law, or Doflamingo can choose to recover the Opi Opi no Mi and thus also killing Law. Either way, Law dies, but his legacy will live on in the form of some very unfortunate consequences. In the most immediate outcome, all of the toys on Dressrosa will probably remain slaves, Sabo won't win the Mera Mera no Mi in the Corridor Coliseum, and Doflamingo and Caesar are never stopped. They continue and continue making weapons for Kaido until he's ready to launch his global campaign. On Wano, the new Onigashima project will be completed, resulting in the murder or enslavement of all remaining citizens on Wano. I want to say that Kaido will eventually realize that he has Pluton, but he hasn't found it in 20 years, so I have no reason to suspect that he ever will. But once ready, Kaido will unleash the biggest war this world has ever seen, immediately forcing the other three emperors into conflict. Some like Blackbeard out of opportunity to capitalize on chaos, or some like Shanks out of his long-standing obligation to stop wars. And of course, some like Big Mom, who shares Kaido's goals of finding the One Piece and becoming the Pirate King. And eventually, the two of them will likely form an alliance just as they did in the series. And in the face of that, Shanks alone will not be enough to stop them. He would either need to form an alliance with the Marines, or a most unlikely alliance with Blackbeard to bring the power dynamic back to parity. Should neither of those things happen, I think that Kaido and Big Mom succeed. The race for Pirate King is essentially narrowed down to the two of them, and the world would be plunged into an even darker era than it currently exists in. And all of this will be thanks to the selfish desires of one very evil Trafalgar Law, who does actually kind of achieve his dream beyond the grave, by the way, because a lot of the individual components that make up the concepts of, quote, everyone and everything will indeed die. These are the 16 most malicious and disturbing devil fruits in One Piece. These are the powers that were directly engineered for suffering, and suffering in some concerningly creative ways as well. For example, the Ato Ato no Mi, a devil fruit that allows its user Jola to transform people, objects, and even herself into art. A lot of online descriptions of this devil fruit state that it needs to be specifically abstract or modern art, but in the series it's never actually stated. It's more likely that abstract art is Jola's preference, and if you preferred, say, French Impressionism, then you'd be able to transform people into some of Monet's haystacks. Or if you are Marcel Duchamp, then you could turn people into lazily sourced urinals. Like art itself, this is a highly subjective devil fruit, which means that more so than most, it really is only limited by the imagination of the user, which is concerning because artists can be some of the scariest people on the planet, as their motivations can very much slip into that abstract realm. Aljola, for example, is a practitioner of dying art, where her main goal is to trap people within her works, suffocate them, and then add the work to her, quote, permanent collection. And Jola combats any criticism of this, usually from her victims, by stating that they simply do not understand the meaning of art. So it's a sandbox fruit used by an incredibly disturbed mind. However, it was ultimately overcome by Brook, who defeated Jola and said, "Forgive me, I don't know much about art after all. I don't really have an eye for it," because he literally has no eyes. Or most of a body, which is a big help against the Shibo Shibo no Mi, which means ring fruit, at being ring with a W, like the thing it is you do with a wet towel, which is the exact thing this fruit's user Charlotte Smoothie does to people, animals, and objects. She wrings them out in order to extract their tasty, tasty juices. Charlotte Smoothie is described as a dehydration or evaporation human. So the core idea behind the power is to remove liquid. And there may very well be other methods of doing this, but Smoothie chooses what seems to be the most torturous way possible. However, on the bright side, Smoothie has a whole bar where she serves drink based on these juices that she extracts, with the menu including Mount Mori Lava, Babe Who Stabbed 100 Men, and my personal favorite, Weird Screaming Giraffe. And Stussy elected to taste the giraffe, noting that it was both tasty and smooth. But there are some very important and very underrated abilities that come along with this fruit. Firstly, it makes Smoothie effectively immune to poison, because if anything does infiltrate her rather long body, then she's just able to easily wring it out. And she even comes equipped with an ultimate form called Juicy Giant, where Smoothie can actually use her body to absorb liquid from others and become much more bigger in order to fight as a giant. So personally, I'm a big fan of my liquids. I like them where they are. But even if you do get to keep them, other extraction fruits are available, such as Charlotte Pudding's Memomemonomi, where she plunges her hand into a victim's mind brain and quite literally rips out their memories in the form of an old film strip. There are probably some people watching this video who don't even know what that is, but that's fine. This is what movies used to be. They were long strings of grafted together pictures that we'd flick through real fast to make the pictures move. And in this case, the pictures are actual memories. And this allows Pudding to edit these memories with her special editing scissors before reinserting them. So it's the ultimate gaslight fruit, because you can basically control your target's perception of the world. And this is particularly bad in One Piece because we've recently gotten into an arc where one of the primary themes is the question of whether or not memories constitute a person, and does erasing memories effectively kill that person? The answer being peut-être in French, maybe in English. But whatever the case, this process can be quite brutal, as Vinsmoke Reiju fainted from the pain she experienced after Pudding messed with her memories. Although, sickeningly, I think it's implied that Pudding can control how much, if any, pain the target feels, because when she performed the technique on Sanji, he was perfectly fine afterwards. So that whole Reiju situation, that was malicious and uncalled for, as is everything else in this video, including the Nori Nori no Mi used by hers from the One Piece premiere show 2021. So Nori Nori is a Japanese word that describes people having particularly happy behaviors, a particularly lively or cheersome individual. And what this fruit does is not that. Instead, it forces people to dance. That is the entire fruit. Hers shoots a beam, and if that beam connects, then the victim will dance uncontrollably until they die. Sort of like the the Heads Will Roll song. Off with your head, dance, dance, dance till you're dead, etc. That's this fruit. Given that it's a beam, I should say that it's subject to the mirror weakness, which can reflect any beam type powers, but most pirates aren't vain enough to have mirrors ready to defend, except for maybe Alvida, who, rather narcissistically, may be hers' natural counter. But that's more of a novelty power. Yes, dancing to death, I can't imagine it's amazingly fun, but this next fruit can do some proper global damage. This is the Hore Hore no Mi, a love fruit, used by a quote aphrodisiac man named Bonbon. And Bonbon, as you may have guessed, can force people to fall in love or fall in lust. He can make them like real thirsty. And its primary use was during the 2015 One Piece premiere show, where he invoked his Cupid powers on Nami and actually made her fall in love with a character who wasn't him. That's important. Bonbon can matchmake anyone, so he really is the closest thing the One Piece world has to a Cupid, which also makes it the third time in the One Piece franchise that Nami has almost been forcibly married with a wedding dress and everything. The classic example is Absalom on Thriller Bark, but it actually happened way back before then in movie 2 when the Bear King tried to marry Nami, who was coincidentally wearing a wedding dress at the same time due to other shenaniganry. But this fruit has the potential to be one of the most dangerous in the entire series. Being able to mess with feelings like love and with such a level of precision on a mass scale, look, you've got yourself global anarchy right there. You could topple governments overnight with this fruit. But for something a bit more old-fashioned, we have Hina's Ori Ori no Mi, the bind fruit, which allows her to encage anybody by touching them, at which point Hina's body can manipulate itself into a wide variety of cage and shackle-like constructs. With quite a wide range as well, it's very difficult to avoid, and once you've been caught, we have yet to see anybody physically capable of escaping. This fruit is grouped with the malicious ones because the innate desire to subdue people is always a bit uncomfortable uncomfortable. I suppose this fruit could have been dreamed up by someone who had a strong desire for justice and to make sure that those nasty criminals are off the street. But who decides what is and is not justice? Well, Doflamingo actually tells us in One Piece. He says that justice is determined by the winners. And with this fruit, chances are you're gonna be the winner. So the question becomes, what is justice to Hina? And that would be the ability to get completely smashed on a night out and ignore your marine boyfriend who has wisely called a camel taxi to take you home. But along the same lines, the Heart of Gold special introduced us to the Jara Jara no Mi, the chain fruit used by Mad Treasure. Jara Jara is the Japanese onomatopoeia for jingling and jangling. Jara da 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 da, jara da da da, jara da da da. Doesn't even sound like jangling. What is wrong, Japan? But this is a very underwhelming ability, giving Mad Treasure the power to spawn chains from his body, which are then used to do chain things, I guess. Like using them to hit people and tie people up. And really, this is the objectively worst version of Hina's fruit. And also, using it looks quite painful, because you look at the close-up shots of Treasure spawning the chains out of his hands, and they're often accompanied by spurts of blood, and it's like, ow. It's not pleasant to use or to be subject to, and comes with very few advantages in general, because chains aren't a huge deal in the One Piece world. Any half-decent pirate can either cut through them or break out of them. And hilariously, sadly, Mad Treasure's final form is wrapping himself in chains as a sort of makeshift armor, and it's all just very sad. So we can and will do better, especially since there's a whole class of devil fruits out there that don't even need chains to enact slavery. So now we meet Breed, the concerningly named user of the Peto no Mi, which is already bad because if you say it too quickly, it sounds like pedo. But this isn't much better than that, because this power allows Breed to turn any living being into his pet, aka slave. It's named Pet Fruit because slave fruit, well, that wouldn't be very nice now, would it? Once the vibrant green collar is equipped, Breed's slave will be forced to carry out any verbal commands given, and what's worse is that the slave remains conscious and aware of what they're doing, just unable to control it. Although this fruit is surprisingly easily countered, if someone with a collar on just plugs their ears and they become immune from Breed's commands, because you need to hear the commands in order to be controlled. In a stroke of intrigue, Breed can also use the power to collar up and take control of himself, which brings out his full potential by giving orders to himself. Sort of like the concept behind Shalnak's autopilot from Hunter x Hunter, if that's a thing you know about. If you don't, look, don't worry about it. But really, a lot of devil fruits, they can be defended when it comes to intent. Sure, they're horrible powers, but they were innocent and just being misused. I don't think this is one of them though. This one is just plain slavery. And there's a very similar canon devil fruit used by Tama on Wano called the Kibi no Mi, which allows her to generate delicious kibidango, which, if fed to an animal, establishes a master-servant dynamic. Any animal who consumes a dango will become undyingly loyal to Tama for the period of 1 month. Whether that is 30 days, 31 days, 28 days, even 29 days every 4 years, that is very vague. And the reason why this time limit exists is an effort from Eiichiro Oda to not make it seem like this innocent child is continuously enslaving animals to enact her will. So after a month has passed, the animals are freed, but most of them choose to continue to stay with Tama. And this ability was a game-changing aspect of the Wano arc because Tama was able to use it on all of the smile fruit wielders, which are the permanent half-human, half-animal hybrids. It should also be noted that the dango have no nutritional value. So if you eat one, all you get is temporary slavery. Actually, if you eat one, you get nothing at all because it doesn't work on people. Unlike the Nori no Mi, the Ride fruit power is commanded by Vice Admiral Bluegrass, which allows her to control anyone or anything that she wishes to take a ride on. Bluegrass can choose her steed from the limitless options of the world. However, she does need to physically be on top of the target to ride it. But once on top, she can command anyone or anything to enact her transportation bidding like a good horsey, and it's likely but not confirmed that she can only command one target at a time. But for the ultimate malicious slavery-based fruit, that is always going to be Sugar's Hobby no Mi, where with one touch, Sugar transforms any living thing into a toy slave, although it's a surprisingly litigious process. After transforming someone into a fun toy, Sugar has to form a contract, and if she doesn't, then the toy retains its free will but is still stuck as a toy, so even in that case, things still kinda suck. The worst part is that after a target becomes a toy, all memories of that target are erased in the minds of everyone who previously knew them. So again, we come back to the question of what constitutes life. And in the great words of Dr. Hiroluck, when does a man die? When he is forgotten. Because he got turned into a toy, and due to very specifically worded powers, that means that everyone forgot about him, and he's dead. Dr. Hiroluck is such a wise man. But there also seems to be no limit on how many slaves Sugar can make. On Dressrosa, it was hundreds at least, but probably thousands. And in keeping with the youthful theme of playtime, this fruit also stops the user's aging, as well as the aging of anyone who became a toy, thus becoming a sort of eternal slavery where neither master nor toy will ever be able to escape. It also gets a lot worse than that. There are some even more horrifying aspects when you really research this fruit. So many that I've had to make a whole video explaining the truly morbid nature of this singular fruit. But here's a weird one. The Noko Noko no Mi, or Shroom Shroom fruit used by Mushuru, who's a really weird character in his own right, being Wapol's non-canon brother, appearing in an alternate universe redo of the Drum Island arc. This fruit can produce and control deadly spores, emphasis on deadly. This was not developed for nice reasons, and it turns Mushuru into a sort of budget Magellan. It's a poison fruit designed to poison people. That's where we are, and it really doesn't get much more malicious than that. Or does it? Because Noko is also the name of a seahorse in the very abstract One Piece PlayStation 1 game Ocean's Dream, although he was also featured in the anime, but for some reason with a different name being Tatsu. I don't know why. But in either case, the seahorse possesses the Nemu Nemu no Mi, which traps people in a dream world and can even steal memories to power its seahorse self up. In the anime, it's never actually mentioned that this is a devil fruit power. It's just the game that does that. So it looks like a magic seahorse just popped out of nowhere. And really, it's a pretty insane devil fruit, but not at all a unique one. Because Uta from One Piece film Red has the Uta Uta no Mi, a shockingly similar name to her self-ability, which is in and of itself a similar ability to Noko, who is also named Tatsu. This one is a bit different in that what it does is it transfers people's spirits into an alternate dimension known as the Uta world, and the lifeless bodies left over make it look like everyone's taking a nice nap. However, Uta can only perform this transference through singing, so it's another fruit that is readily countered by plugging up the old ears. So this could be used as a very fun magical experience, but it wasn't. Uta's plan in film Red was to sing to as many people as the world as she could, trap them all in the Uta realm, then kill herself, which would leave everyone's spirits trapped in that ultimate dimension for all eternity? I don't know, but it's not good. And there is another fruit that can do kind of the same thing, but with the user remaining alive, which would be Charlotte Montdeur's Buka Buka no Mi, which can either physically trap people within actual books, or it can trap people within an illusion of the setting of a book. Montdeur can effectively create his own holodeck by opening up any book and creating an illusion to explore the world of that story. It was a pretty criminally underused fruit, mostly tapped to stock Big Mom's library, where she keeps encyclopedias of strange living creatures within Montdeur's prison books. But if you were after something a bit more modern, then perhaps I could interest you in the Gemu Gemu no Mi, which transports people into a game world chosen by Dama. Right, who is Dama, you ask? Well, he's a guy, a real life guy actually, who is a member of Fishers, a Japanese YouTube channel who actually got to interview Eiichiro Oda, and they subsequently received their own spin-off manga, which is still being published to this day, featuring the group's journey through the One Piece world, with Dama's tablet specifically being given this devil fruit. With it, Dama can select any game to drop people into non-consensually. So long as there's a game installed on his tablet, you can go in it, which means that you can just casually drop people into Resident Evil or Outlast or something and give them a real bad time, which happened to Arlong when Dama dropped him into a Super Smash Bros. Style game. So pretty innocent and fun, at least in the spin-off manga, but a fruit that could be used for some very malicious and not at all nice purposes. And those are the 16 malicious devil fruits in One Piece. Doflamingo had a plan. That plan was to collapse the entire world government, bring down the 4 emperors, spank the revolutionary army on their insolent behinds, and ascend to become a literal immortal god king of the planet, sitting atop the empty throne. And he would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for those meddling kids. But what if there were no meddling kids? What if Doflamingo's plan had been allowed to succeed? What would the world look like? Well, the answer to that question is more horrific than you could ever imagine. Or not. Maybe you have like a really sick imagination. Whatever, let's find out. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam, and the most horrific thing that I can imagine is mushrooms on toast. I mean, why would you ruin toast like that? But today we are here to talk about the Machiavellian, misanthropic, and on occasion, medescent mess of a man that is Don Quixote Doflamingo. Medescent means damp or slightly moist, by the way. And this moist man was at one time the biggest threat in all of One Piece. And when I say threat, I know that's a very subjective word, because it all depends on one's perspective and what faction they represent. Not with Doflamingo though. When I call him a threat, I mean it doesn't matter where in this world you stand, this flamboyant flagrant is a threat to you. Emperor, Elder Stars, Elderly Whoopslap, it doesn't matter which of these best describes you personally, because Doflamingo is still going going to be gunning for your head, and he may even wear your bucket hat afterwards for fun. And here's why he would have succeeded. Before we continue though, our subscribers of the day are Arya Lynch, Ivan Alviles, and Crocwatch, who all did an amazing thing, which was press the subscribe button for the Grand Line Review, which by the way, doing so will result in consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed. So if you'd like to be our next subscriber of the day, then hit the button and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome. But to begin with Doflamingo, I think that his existence really does get pushed to one side these days. Mainly because he isn't the best puncher, nor his crew particularly amazing at the punching either. He's powerful enough, but he doesn't have the physicality or the following to take this world by force. So instead, Doflamingo focused his efforts through a different avenue. Or avenue is plural, actually, because Doflamingo achieved something that no other character in the series has ever even come close to, which is global domination via trade and politics. And I get it, those are two highly unarousing words, but just consider it this way. Doflamingo formed a business partnership with Kaido. This was a deal to provide Mr. Manbeast with smile fruits to amp up the Emperor's crew and allow him to build the forces necessary to wage war against, checks notes, literally everything. Because if there's one thing that every military superpower needs, it is alpaca heads, lion crotches, and of course, chicken butts. However, through this trade deal, Doflamingo earned the backing of the strongest creature in the world and his emperatic forces. And immediately that meant that Doflamingo had effective immunity from the other three emperors, because any action taken against Doflamingo would be tantamount to declaring war on Kaido. So the top players in the piracy world couldn't touch him, but it also safeguarded Doflamingo from the lower levels of piracy, as with the backing of an emperor, it meant that smaller pirate groups were much less inclined to make Doflamingo their enemy, as that would be like poking the vicious yet delicious Kaido beehive. But Doflamingo doesn't just harvest his honey from a single hive. No, this is a bad metaphor. Doflamingo does not keep all of his dragon eggs in the one Kaido basket, because even an Emperor of the Sea cannot offer full protection, particularly against the world government. And this is where sneaky flamingo-based politics come into play. Doflamingo, due to his circumstances as a former celestial bungle nut, holds very particular knowledge that, if made public, could destabilize the world government overnight. And the most prominent example of that we have is Doflamingo threatening to reveal what their national treasure is. However, realistically, he could probably cause a lot more damage than that. So in turn, Doflamingo blackmails not only the world government, but the 5 Elder Stars directly. And potentially even Eam himself actually, because in the end, Eam is the funky spiral-eyed dude guy who makes all of the decisions and stuff. Whatever the case though, through this blackmail, Doflamingo protected himself both against the world government and the Marines. And not only that, but he can also utilize those powers to his advantage, as on at least one occasion, he did display the power to utilize CP0 for his own personal needs. And I mean, if Doflamingo really wanted to, he could probably even order CP0 to dress up in French maid outfits and clean his various toilets. That is the kind of wild power that Doflamingo has, but it doesn't stop there. But he also demanded to become a warlord of the sea, which is yet another barrier of protection. The big thing here being that it froze his bounty. So there is absolutely no incentive whatsoever to go after Doflamingo. You'd be declaring war on an emperor, the world government, and even if you were successful, there's no reward for bringing Doflamingo down, other than saying, I did the thing. So bounty hunters and other third parties are just like, Doflamingo, that's a lot of effing around for not a lot of finding out. Which only leaves us with underworld factions, groups that exist outside of the established public constructs, and wouldn't you know it, Doflamingo made himself indispensable to them as well by crafting the alias of Joker and becoming the most powerful of all of the underworld brokers, specializing in weapons, slavery, and even super rare goods. Things like Adam Wood or dance powder. Stuff that you can't buy in your local pirate department store, but stuff that you can buy at your shady underground Mingo Mart. With all of this in mind, Doflamingo became too big to fail, because every major faction in this world had a vested interest in keeping Doflamingo in power. If Doflamingo were to just one day vanish, then Kaido would lose his source of weapons, the world government would lose his silence in regards to their many secrets, and the entire underworld would lose their greatest supplier. Doflamingo, despite not being the most powerful in a traditional sense of military might, lubed himself up and inserted himself into the global machine, becoming a truly indispensable cog. And if he were to stop spinning, then the entire machine would go, hey, what are you doing? If you don't spin, I don't spin. And the entire machine would just implode on itself. In a way, he was actually more dangerous than an emperor. Because from a world government perspective, sure, Kaido is a big guy who hits things. Hits things like really hard. But Doflamingo is a man who could have turned the world upside down by simply uttering a single sentence in public. And I really don't think this war of information side of Doflamingo is ever truly appreciated. Nobody will ever again accomplish what he was able to do, and he always had a keen mind for the metagame. You want to know why we never saw Doflamingo's eyes? Because they're not actually there. Doflamingo's eyes were far too busy living in the future. In fact, one of his earliest quotes from chapter 303 is, "Those without power had better run away while they can. Like an unstoppable wave, a new age of unmatched power is coming." Which in retrospect was actually Doflamingo referring to Kaido's plan of declaring war on the world, a situation that he was going to well and truly take advantage of. Which brings us to his ultimate plan. Knowing that he could neither oppose the world government or any of the emperors, Doflamingo's best option was to do the classic thing of just smacking the game off the table and then starting a new game. Kaido's war was going to function as that great refresher, something that could bring down the world government as well as drag the other emperors into conflict with one another. It would have been a brutal, destructive, and incredibly lengthy conflict, but Doflamingo was looking even beyond that, because the problem is, no matter who won this conflict, Doflamingo still likely would not have been able to oppose them, because for example, Big Dragon Fist is always going to trump the limited powers of a tiny Flamingo Fist. So this is where fictional fruit comes into things. From quite early on in his career as a douchebag, Doflamingo had his sights set on the Ope Ope no Mi. At one stage, his plan was to have Rocinante eat the fruit and perform the immortality operation on him, which is also known as the Perpetual Youth Surgery or Perennial Youth Operation, depending on what you read and or watch. But this fruit was the key to the long game, because Doflamingo, as established, was always looking into the future. He had something that really no other high-level character in the series has, which is patience. And without the fear of growing old, Doflamingo would have been free to continue to be a master manipulator on into eternity and just gradually work his way to the top. I mean, think about it. If worse comes to worse, Doflamingo could defeat Kaido by simply outliving him. That's not quite it though, because the fruit was only half of the equation. Because according to Doflamingo, when the eternal youth granted by the Ope Ope no Mi is combined with the ever mysterious national treasure, then that results in the very vaguely defined ability to, quote, seize true world power. And we have no real reason to doubt this either. If his plan had continued, Doflamingo would have been the only one with the knowledge and skill required to bring this combination to fruition. And at the very least in his mind brain, accomplishing this goal would give him the ability to deal with emperors, revolutionary armies, and I guess anything really. Thus ushering in a very dark yet bright pink era of the world, led by someone who sees every race as a commodity as opposed to a life form. Unfortunately, as brilliant as he is, Doflamingo was just looking so far ahead of himself that he lost sight of what was in front of him. And through a set of extraordinary coincidences, which in retrospect we label as fate, a coalition of rogue forces bred almost entirely by Doflamingo's own actions spawned to bring him down. It took a group of pirates who had no fear of the emperors, a marine admiral who had no fear of the world government, and a whole ton of other people who were just sort of there and mightily pissed off that they got turned into toys, because it's not a nice thing to do. Doflamingo believed that with the backing of an emperor, the underworld, and the world government, that nobody could stand against him. However, Doflamingo made just enough small rogue enemies that his delicious pot of immortality soup boiled over, and in the space of a single day, he lost everything. From riches to stitches, influence to insignificance, and most insultingly of all, pastel prominence to monochromatic mediocrity. However, even Doflamingo's defeat had major global ramifications, as he himself states to Suru when being transported to Impel Down. "I was the one holding the reins on all the monsters in this world. You shouldn't have taken me down. Mark my words. This is going to kick off the greatest battle for power in the history of pirate kind." Which, I don't know, POV, you're Suru, this probably just sounds like crazy guys saying crazy things. But Doflamingo wasn't wrong. In fact, he was the opposite of wrong, which is right. Nobody was more essential to the current state of global stability than he was. Because let's examine the consequences of removing this cog from our world machine. Doflamingo's defeat directly triggered Kaido to put his war into action, because there was no point in waiting any longer. He had all the smile he would ever receive. Kaido just said, let's go hit things now. And on the other side, Doflamingo's defeat directly triggered the dissolution of the Seven Warlords, which yes, was according to Fujitori's agenda, but without the support of King Riku at the Reverie, and the widespread news of yet another corrupt warlord, this system would have remained in place. Furthermore, in a move that the world has yet to truly appreciate, Doflamingo's downfall also gave birth to the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. Because really, this fleet may as well be called the anti-stupid Smile Man Alliance, because Doflamingo cultivated it. He lured all of these individuals to one location, and he is the core glue that bound them together. And this fleet is now destined to cause an incident of, quote, historic proportions. actions. And even putting the Grand Fleet to one side, Doflamingo's failure on Dressrosa is what has allowed the Kozuki vassals to reunite and plan the raid on Onigashima, an event that is set to see 2 of the 4 emperors fall from prominence. So how wild is all of that? The mistakes of one singular string boy is going to be directly responsible for the defeat of 2 emperors, the rise of Luffy as a global superpower, and the dissolution of the entire warlord system. And that's before we even talk about the power vacuum that Joker's absence will have created in the underworld. And I really don't think that everything set in motion by removing this cog will truly be appreciated until we see the end game of One Piece. This domino effect is one of, if not the most severe we've ever seen. It's even an entire order of magnitude more chaotic than the death of Whitebeard. So maybe, just maybe, it was worth taking 2.5 years to play out the events of a single day, because that single day changed the fate of the entire world. We were on a very dark path, destined for an eternal night featuring a long, unforgiving war, with Doflamingo gradually set to emerge as the ruler of a new cruel dystopia. But now, thanks to his removal, we're on the track to see the dawn of a much better world. The darkest moment of One Piece is probably that one time where Luffy had his eyes closed. I mean, just look at this. I can't see anything. Thankfully, he did open his eyes. However, what he discovered was something even more terrifying. Dark Af. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and today it is time to once again delve into the more unpleasant aspects of the series, because for what is perceived as a light, fluffy, action-packed, and goofily illustrated property, One Piece quite frequently leads its audience into territory that they weren't necessarily expecting, stuff that makes you go, holy crap, that's pretty dark, isn't it? Which is one of the great advantages of the series. It really does present that full spectrum of human emotion, and only after seeing the darkness can we truly appreciate the light. And we're going to be appreciating a lot of light after this video. But with that in mind, it's time for a quick round of Dark versus Light, a very simple minigame, the rules of which are as follows. We are currently sitting in a very dark room, and we need to turn on the lights. When I turn on the light, either the Dark Fiend Blackbeard or High as a Light Kizaru will be revealed in this very room. Your job is simply to guess which one of them it will be. And if you guess incorrectly, then your punishment will be to subscribe to the Grand Line Review, which also does have the side effect of granting regular One Piece content uploaded straight into your YouTube feed. And if you do guess correctly, then the door will promptly close behind you and you will get to spend some quality time with whoever is in this room. Good luck. So make your choice now. When the light comes on, will it be Blackbeard or will it be Kizaru? We shall reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1, and it's Kizaru. As for why he spends all of his time in a dark room, nobody knows. But if you guessed incorrectly, then you know the thing it is you need to do, and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome. But now that we've engaged in some debaucherous subscribe games, let's slip into a slightly more serious demeanor, because our first dark secret of One Piece to be featured in this video is going to be serial killer Rob Lucci. So Lucci is often remembered as one of the greater and more popular antagonists of the series, and his fight against Luffy during Enies Lobby is one of the great highlights of, well, I suppose, my life. But what often gets discarded in all of the combative glory is the incredibly sickening nature of this man. To call him sadistic would be putting it lightly. In fact, the only times in the series when Mr. Rob Lucci has been shown smiling or even enjoying himself to a minor degree is when he is inflicting pain or thinking about inflicting pain or toying with another person in some way, shape, or form. For example, during the Reverie arc, he was ordered to kill King Neptune, and Lucci immediately broke into a smile just considering the prospect of delicious murder. Although I think an often underrated example of his sadism was when Caulifla and Kaku were offered devil fruits. In this scenario, Lucci just sat there egging them on to consume the devil fruit and potentially end up cursing the entirety of their remaining existence. That is something that Lucci wanted to see. He was excited, potentially even aroused. And as for a more well-known example, well, the entire reason why he joined Cypherpol was simply so that he could legally kill people. It doesn't matter who those people are or why they need to die or if they need to die. Lucci just wants to take life and cause pain, and as such he has found his perfect employer within the World Nobles because, weirdly enough, their value systems kind of match up perfectly. So yeah, whilst Lucci may be remembered as a crowning antagonist of the series, he is indeed one sick mofo, and if you linger on him for too long, well, we're going on a very dark journey. As for Lucci's opponent on Enies Lobby, Luffy has been subjected to some pretty incredibly dark stuff as well. I often see people complaining that Luffy's backstory isn't dark or it's not tragic compared to the other Straw Hats, which always takes me back to at the time when a 7-year-old Luffy was tortured right in front of our eyes by Porchemi, a member of the Blue Jam Pirates. And this session began with Porchemi attempting to crush Luffy's body with a giant hammer, but after realizing that Luffy was indeed a Devil Fruit user, Porchemi got a bit more creative. Switching to spiked gloves that did indeed damage our rubber lad, damaged him quite a bit in a series of panels and scenes that are very difficult for me to watch. And the point of it is to show that Luffy would rather die than give up the secrets of Ace and Sabo, and well, it definitely worked, because Porchemi continued to torture Luffy until the sun went down. And according to another of the Blue Jam Pirates who begged him to stop, I quote, "He doesn't even have the strength left to scream." Oh, and also just another fun side note, apparently Porchemi was quite famous for scalping his victims alive, kind of like a signature maneuver of his according to Sabo. So Luffy's past has a whole host of this dark crap for us to deal with. For now though, let's skip ahead in time to the Thriller Bark arc, which is always fun to say. What's less fun is to think about the really insane and kind of sickening relationship between Victoria Sindri and Dr. Hogback, or more accurately I suppose, the corpse of Victoria Sindri. As the story goes, Sindri was an incredibly famous actress within a certain unnamed nation, and Dr. Hogback, after treating her one day, became just a little bit obsessed with Sindri, even going so far as to propose to her. Although he was rejected, allegedly because Sindri had already become engaged to someone else, but more than likely also because it's Hogback. After which point Sindri had a fatal accident, which would usually end this kind of tragic story. However, death was simply another opportunity for Dr. Hogback, and he agreed to join the crew of Gecko Moria on the condition that Moria would insert a shadow into the lingering vessel of Sindri, and fulfill Hogback's desire to have a very obedient Sindri forever by his side. Or at least theoretically obedient, and didn't quite work out that way. But he frequently ordered his new Sindri to do all sorts of degrading things, such as lick the floor and endure all kinds of physical abuse. And to add on to all of this, another victim was needed simply to complete this abomination, who was a girl named Margarita. Her shadow was stolen by Moria to insert into Sindri's body, so this whole thing is just one big, weird, dark, and disturbing combination of factors coming together to fulfill the twisted desires of a pointy-nosed doctor. And Hogback isn't even the only dark secret of Gecko Moria's crew, because we haven't even spoken about Absalom yet. In the series, he is a well-established pervert, and even his zombie minions refer to him as Eroslam or Pervislam in the English translation, because apparently he likes to peep on ladies. Which, you know, not okay, but it's also not quite a darker aspect of the series yet. You see, Absalom isn't like your typical peeping shonen situation. You know the standard moment of every series where there's like a Hot Springs episode and the guys formulate this infallible plan to look over the wall into the women's section, but usually end up getting seriously injured in the process. I mean, we've even done that in One Piece actually during Alabasta. Good times. This is not one of those times. In this case, Nami was taking a bath and Absalom entered in invisible mode and forced her up against a wall, examined her, and were it not for Usopp and Chopper interrupting, who knows where things would have gone from there. And this is one of those moments where I'm just kind of shocked that Oda would actually do this to one of his characters. Not to mention the time where he just full on grabbed Robin and licked her, which is pretty blatant sexual assault, and I'm always really weirded out by that panel as well. But yeah, Absalom, Erasalam, Pervisalam, or Sexual Assault Salam is easily one of the darker aspects of the series, wrapped in a somewhat comedic package. Let's move away from there now and into the life and times of one Don Quixote Doflamingo. This man has no shortage of dark secrets. In fact, he's usually the cause of said secrets. On this occasion though, I want to talk about what happened to him as a child, something that was absolutely not his fault, which was when his father Homing abandoned their status as world nobles to go and live with greater humanity. Unfortunately, the abandoning of that status meant very, very little to those on the surface, and at one stage, young Doflamingo, as well as his father Homing and brother Rocinante, were hung from windows shot with arrows and a fire set under them, whilst various people stated the atrocities that the world nobles had caused them. And according to Rocinante, Doflamingo was born with an innately evil nature, although I have to say that after witnessing this, I kind of identify with him for a bit and understand his words, because whilst being tortured by the masses, a child-sized Doflamingo yelled that he would hunt down and kill every last one of them. And whilst I'm not really sure how they escaped from this situation, they did, which would eventually lead to Doflamingo electing to murder his own father for the suffering that he had inadvertently caused. It really is one of the more grim flashbacks in One Piece, which tends to happen with the villains actually. Their events are a whole degree more twisted than the protagonist, which definitely goes on to inform their actions in the modern day. With that said, this has been our second instance of child torture on this list here today, so let's spice things up a bit with some adults. Moving to Zou now, and quite possibly one of the most brutal events to have ever been showcased in the series. Things got pretty wild in that Jack flashback, and certainly not in a good way, because just to linger on Jack for a moment, everything I said about Rob Lucci very much applies to this man as well. He is one of the most ruthless and sadistic beings that One Piece has to offer, even more so than his Captain Kaido, I would argue. And two unfortunate victims of this nature would be the ever ever-lovable Inuarashi and Nekomamushi. After putting up an incredible 5-day fight, Jack and his forces did overcome the Ming tribe, and after refusing to answer Jack's questions in the way he desired, the Billion-Berry Man responded by taking a limb from both Nekomamushi and Inuarashi. And not only that, but Oda also chose to showcase the damage when the Twirly Hat pirates arrived, and it was pretty damn heavy to see the two of them hanging from their cross-like restraints, slowly bleeding to death. It was just brutality on a scale that One Piece doesn't often cover. Even Doflamingo's flashback wasn't quite this visceral and hard-hitting, and it just shows that Oda is not afraid to push the limits of the shonen genre. When darkness is required, he will implement it without question. Especially when it comes to our antagonists, and in this sort of mindset, one event that always comes back to me is Marineford, where Sakazuki just up and murdered one of his soldiers. Now, Sakazuki also made our first Dark Secret video due to his actions during the genocide of Ohara, which was on quite a grand scale. However, this man's darkness also operates on a micro scale as well, because when several Marines ran away from the terrifying Paramount War, including Kobe, one very unfortunate soldier crossed paths with Sakazuki, who gave him one chance to get back onto the battlefield before deciding to execute the poor Marine right then and there. A very rare instance of death occurring outside of a flashback in One Piece. And no, we don't actually see the execution itself, but Sakazuki did pretty blatantly state, if you care about your family, then die an honorable death. Before we cut to the screams of said Marine dying a quote-unquote honorable death and Kobe's horrified reaction. It's such a brief moment as well, like it's not even a page and a half long, but it's an action that had more impact on me than many of the Marineford matchups. Just because it's such an unexpectedly dark place for One Piece to go. Even if he was just a random Marine, Oda does not make the decision to kill characters lightly. And I do think that this particular scene is a giant part of why Sakazuki is such a feared character, because he will break our expectations of One Piece. When he is present, there is a very serious danger to contend with, all in the name of dark absolute justice. And you know what? After experiencing all of these dark secrets of the series, our next one makes a lot more sense, which involves another Marine Admiral being Fujitora, who you know is a pretty cool guy overall, quite kind and all that. However, he has been well and truly exposed to the underbelly of One Piece, because after witnessing just how corrupt and messed up this planet is, Fujitora made the decision to physically blind himself so that he could avoid ever seeing it again. And while we don't know exactly what Fujitora saw, this drastic action tells you that it was probably far more twisted than anything we've actually experienced in this video here today. And we may never know exactly what drove Fujitora to this point, and maybe that's for the best, because the deeper we delve into One Piece, the surprisingly darker it manages to become. If this theory is correct, then Blackbeard is going to become the next Pirate King. It also explains why he doesn't sleep. And speaking of, Blackbeard has two major themes attached to his character that we're aware of, those being fate and sleep. So to lay the groundwork, we're going to start with fate. In chapter 222, Van Alga shoots seagulls in the distance that land on the Going Merry, stating, "Poor things, how they must have suffered. I wasn't able to kill one of them instantly, but that's fate. Such are the vagaries of life." He's the first real introduction that we have to the Blackbeard pirates, and he starts a very clear motif. In chapter 223, Luffy, Zoro, and Nami meet an old man named Doc Q, and the Straw Hats help him back onto his horse, who is also an old horseman. As thanks, Doc Q offers the crew an apple from his basket, which Luffy immediately takes and eats without a second thought, and as it turns out, the majority of these apples were explosives that kill people instantly after taking a bite. Doc Q then reassures the crew that Luffy will be okay, and that he's a lucky boy. Usually Oda is a bit more subtle with his themes, but with this group of people, he is really trying to hit you over the head with the idea of fate. Also in chapter 223, Jesus Burgess makes his presence known as a grappling champion, which immediately piques the interest of Luffy and Zoro, who both have the desire to take that title away from him, but they're thankfully stopped by Nami, because at this point in the series, neither Luffy nor Zoro stands a chance against Burgess. And as if the Straw Hats haven't had enough near misses in a single chapter, near the end of 223 is when Luffy meets Blackbeard for the first time, who is then only known as Cherry Pie Man, with the two of them almost escalating matters into a fist fight, which again would have ended in defeat and or death for Luffy. And that marks 4 times in 2 chapters that the Straw Hats have narrowly escaped from death. Van Alga had them in his sights when shooting the seagulls, Doc Q could have killed him with his apples, and if either Luffy or Zoro got into a contest with Burgess, then it would have ended very poorly for them. However, fate was kind enough to steer Luffy and his crew out of these pitfalls, so it would have ended their adventure, and unlike most people who encounter Luffy in One Piece, the Blackbeard pirates were well aware of exactly what was going on, which is why Blackbeard sits outside of the bar in Mocktown and waits for Luffy, because he recognizes Luffy as a kindred spirit who has been touched by fate. And that's well before Blackbeard even discovers that Luffy is a member of the D-Clan. But fate, mate, she is quite the fickle mistress. Because as much as Luffy is blessed by fate and that guides him through his journey by day, by night, fate is also secretly cheating on Luffy with Blackbeard and guiding him through all of the right steps to do all of the bad things as goodly as possible. For every outrageously convenient situation that has saved and paved the way for Luffy, Blackbeard has had something equally as convenient happen to facilitate his rise to power. He and Luffy are without question the two luckiest people on the planet. Although while I would use the phrase blessed by fate for Luffy, I would probably use the phrase cursed by fate for Blackbeard. Which brings us to the idea of sleep. Chapter 966 threw quite the curveball at us in regards to good old Blackbeard, because during the Oden flashback, Buggy claims that Child Teach didn't sleep the last night or the night before, and he goes on to state that they say he's never slept in his life. To which young Shanks replies, "What? Is that even possible? Lucky guy. I bet his life has been twice as fun." And I highly doubt that, because even though this was the first time that Oda had outright stated it, there had been hints about Blackbeard's sleep habits or lack thereof earlier. In fact, 8 years before this chapter was released, Oda drew a Child Teach in the SBS of Volume 63, crying under a full moon, which we can now infer is because he can't get to sleep. Marshall D. Teach is a man incapable of dreaming. Quite ironic, considering that he's responsible for one of the most famous dream quotes in all of One Piece, which is obviously that people's dreams never die. But then again, the fact that Blackbeard cannot sleep means that he's that much more focused on tangible dreams in reality. So while people who satisfy their imaginations while sleeping are able to easily dismiss ideas like, oh, Sky Islands, Emerald Cities, and even the One Piece, well, wacky ideas, Blackbeard has never had that experience, and so he lives to pursue these ideas. And it probably makes him believe in these concepts that much more. Because if Blackbeard has never experienced what a dream is, then he has no idea how truly ridiculous they are. At the same time, though, he never gets to experience how wondrous they are and is cursed, which is what might be driving him to capture those dreams in reality. Now, there is another very, very, very well-known story that involves the two primary themes of fate and sleep, one that Oda may have taken some inspiration for with Blackbeard's character. So let me know if you've heard this plot before. A man driven and or guided by the idea of fate conducts a series of calculated murders to gain power, inevitably reaching the title of king, but setting himself on the path to his own destruction, all the while being cursed to, quote, sleep no more. So you may have heard the phrase sleep no more before. It's been floating around for a good 400 years, and it originates from this little work called Macbeth by some dude named Shakespeare. And weirdly enough, Blackbeard's journey in One Piece so far has been sinisterly similar to Macbeth's. Turns out fictional pirates and fictional Scotsmen have more in common than you may have initially thought. Every move that Blackbeard has made in One Piece has a corresponding beat in Macbeth, which gives us a terrifying potential explanation for why Blackbeard doesn't sleep, but also an even more terrifying glimpse into the future, as things are only set to get far, far worse for us before they get better. Let's briefly go back to the idea of fate. The inciting incident of Macbeth is when the titular character, Macbeth, stumbles upon three witches that give him a prophecy which states, "Hail to thee, Thane of Glamis! Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor! All hail Macbeth! Thou shalt be king hereafter." So for the sake of ease, a Thane is a nobleman who controls assorted lands, and the witches are hailing Macbeth with his current and future titles. And the belief that these witches have foretold the future is what drives Macbeth to make a series of murdersome decisions to make his way to the position of king. And I have to say, it's quite similar to Blackbeard's journey. Hail to thee, warlord of the sea! Hail to thee, emperor of the new world! All hail Blackbeard! Thou shalt be pirate king hereafter. Okay, so this probably sounds like a stretch at the moment, and that's because I've not given you the good stuff yet. Because words and titles are cool and all, but so are numbers. So what could three witches possibly have to do with Blackbeard? I mean, other than the fact that Blackbeard was originally supposed to be introduced alongside three witches of his own. Okay, so the word witches is definitely a stretch, but one of the most curious things about this Marshall D. Teach guy is something that never made it into the actual story, or at the very least has yet to reveal itself for as of yet unknown reasons. One of Oda's original ideas for Blackbeard was that his character was going to be accompanied by three women, his mother and two sisters. Here they are. You can see the mother looking very petite and witch-like, whereas Blackbeard's sisters are more along the lines of your standard Oda beautiful woman design, which certainly begs the question of exactly what went wrong with Blackbeard's DNA inside the dirty oven that was his mother's womb. This has always been quite a perplexing revelation for the One Piece fanbase to contend with. It just seems like it comes out of of nowhere. And one common idea with Blackbeard is that he's actually 3 people, hence why he can do stuff like use 3 devil fruits and doesn't need to sleep. Maybe some of him needs to sleep, but they take turns. And perhaps Oda decided not to separate his sisters. Instead, they're present, but inside of him. Although this was supposed to be revealed after Jaya. We know that these characters were meant to appear at the end of Water 7 because in their sketches, Oda has included Ace's reaction to them, which is even more curious. So the idea is that Ace catches up to Blackbeard on Banaro Island, sees these 3 women, and is shocked and confused. I want to emphasize that Oda actually showing us these sketches likely means that the idea has been dropped. I don't expect to ever see these characters in One Piece, but it's a fascinating window into Oda's thought process at the time. He clearly had a solid idea going with these 3 women. But at this point, I'd also like to bring up that the 3 witches in Macbeth specifically mention the ability to stop people sleeping. The famous "sleep no more" line is actually used by Macbeth himself. He claims to have seen a hallucination or heard a voice that informs him that, quote, "Macbeth shall sleep no more." In a lot of analysis, this is taken as a manifestation of guilt, because he does say this right after, kill murdering someone. But there is another, more supernatural explanation. In Act 1, Scene 3, before Macbeth arrives, the witches are having a bit of a chit-chat about their past activities, where one of them states, "I am already master of other winds, the locations from which they originate, and every direction on the compass that they can blow. I'll drain him until he's dry as hay, and won't let him sleep during night nor day. He'll live as a cursed man." Should also point out that the person this witch cursed was a ship captain, but it would imply that they have the power to take away a person's ability to sleep. And the line very much applies to Blackbeard, living as a cursed man who will not be allowed to sleep during night nor day. And the original idea behind Blackbeard happened to include these 3 mysterious women of unknown intentions, seemingly assisting Blackbeard on his fated quest to become the Pirate King. If I haven't done this enough already, it's so important to emphasize just how much Blackbeard knows and understands that he's a subject of fate, because that's something that Luffy doesn't realize about himself. But Blackbeard knows that he is destined to do something. And not only that, but Blackbeard seemingly has that path laid out for him, because even at the age of 12, when he requested to join the Whitebeard Pirates, he did this knowing that it would be the best opportunity to find the Yami Yami no Mi, the darkness fruit that was the key to his rise to power. The fruit he said he'd been searching for his whole life, and the ability that Blackbeard claims chose him. Which, firstly, that line hits a lot harder now that we know that certain devil fruits have wills of their own, the idea that this fruit chose him. But secondly, how does a 12-year-old have such an intricately crafted plan? How does a 12-year-old know this much about the world and what he needs to find? He doesn't, not naturally. Someone's plural or something, gave him the information. Just like how Macbeth was prophesied to become king by the 3 witches. If they hadn't have told him anything, then he wouldn't have done anything. And not only that, but Macbeth's efforts to become king took place at night whilst everyone else was sleeping. He acted in the shadows whilst people were at the most vulnerable, because Macbeth does not sleep. In fact, Macbeth shall sleep no more, in the same way that Blackbeard hid in the shadows and plotted by night to achieve his destiny. So there's a total of 5 steps to complete before reaching the position of maniacal kingman. Blackbeard has already completed 3 of those steps flawlessly, I might add, the first of which was gaining trust. Macbeth could never have achieved anything without the utmost trust from King Duncan, which he gained by thoroughly dispatching Duncan's enemies and consolidating his assorted Scottish powers. This is the sort of trust that takes years, even decades to build up, and Blackbeard made that investment. He was a member of the Whitebeard Pirates for 26 years before the opportunity to seize power presented itself. He was a member for so long that Teach was on the cusp of becoming one of Whitebeard's commanders. In fact, the only reason why the Division 2 commander position was vacant was because Teach declined to take it. Teach was even the one who encouraged Ace to become the commander, again choosing to hide in the shadows cast by a very bright flame. And then one day, it happened. Step 2, betrayal. Things go a bit out of order here, but both Macbeth and Teach end up killing their close comrades because they see it as an important step in the prophecy. Macbeth kills his bestie Banquo because the witches said that Banquo's descendants would also be king, and Blackbeard kills Thatch because he found the Yami Yami no Mi, and therefore getting rid of Thatch via vicious kill murder became an integral part of Blackbeard's prophecy. We also can't undersell the degree of Blackbeard's betrayal. Macbeth and Banquo were the Scottish lord equivalent to besties, whereas Teach and Thatch were brothers. That's the format of the Whitebeard Pirates family. However, step 3 was to usurp the crown, which Macbeth did in the dead of night, choosing to murder Duncan in his sleep whilst he was at his most vulnerable. And wouldn't you know it, our much hairier, much more rotund One Piece Macbeth did exactly the same. He waited until Whitebeard was in his most vulnerable state during the Paramount War, and he struck out of nowhere. And whilst it wasn't nighttime, he did cover himself in a sheet, so it was dark. But again, he hid in the shadows. And a year later, Blackbeard was officially declared an Emperor of the Sea after usurping Whitebeard's position following the Payback War. This is the point at which Macbeth became king. Duncan was dead, his sons were blamed for the murder, and everything fit into place quite nicely. However, I dare say that Blackbeard has yet to fully reach this point because he's a man who believes that he's destined to become the Pirate King. An emperor is not good enough. And given everything we've seen from him so far, of all the puzzle pieces that have fit so perfectly in his rise to power, I don't doubt that he has the capabilities and even fated role of becoming the next Pirate King. The most curious thing though is that Macbeth knew that his reign wouldn't last, because again the witches told him who would eventually become king afterwards, Banquo's progeny, which sent him into a spiral of horror, trying to prevent the very fate that he had believed in so strongly to get himself there. Which takes us to part 4, Madness and Tragedy. To maintain his grip on power, Macbeth went on a murder spree, killing the family of Macduff, the man who would eventually put an end to his tyranny. Now this is something that you could argue that Blackbeard has already done, because he was technically responsible for the death of Ace. I mean, yeah, Sakazuki killed him, but this entire war was orchestrated by Blackbeard. So Blackbeard's actions killed the family of Luffy, our obvious Macduff. However, there is another tragedy yet to come, because it could also be argued that Luffy's family tragedy is going to be Shanks. Shanks being killed by Blackbeard is not a new thought. I've talked about it, rather appropriately, to death, so I'm not going to go too deeply into it here, but it's a very likely outcome, and one that paves the way for the final act, which is the inevitable downfall. So what happens next is, and it's rather cheeky, as part of their prophecy, the witches informed Macbeth that no man born of a woman can kill him, which Macbeth misinterprets as him being undefeatable, which is a lifestyle currently enjoyed by Blackbeard and his crew. A bunch of crazy YOLO swaggers willing to do any number of stupid things like invade Impel Down and get team wiped by Magellan's fatal poison. They're willing to do things like that because they have the utmost trust in fate. There is some greater force at play backing them, and thus allowing them to conduct what any reasonable person would consider to be suicidal tactics. And Luffy does the same, except without the knowledge of the fate that's backing him. But that's the thing. Macbeth isn't the only character in the play to be subject to the prophecy, because in a painfully semantic twist of fate, it turns out that Macduff was born from a C-section and was thus technically not born via the traditional vaginal path of a woman, which allows him to strike down Macbeth. And I think that Luffy occupies a very similar role. Blackbeard recognizes Luffy as a man touched by fate, but he does not fear Luffy, not the way he should, because whatever prophecy it is guiding Blackbeard has sneakily shrouded Luffy's role, and that's something unlikely to become apparent to Blackbeard until the final moments of the final conflict. Something I've slowly begun to realize over the years is that we've never seen Blackbeard in a state of uncertainty. No matter what situation he's in, he goes into it knowing what his dinner plans are afterwards. And that's crazy because not even Luffy is that confident. And that will be his downfall. Blackbeard will miss something and will be struck down by Luffy, who will then go on to fulfill his own fate, but we've got a lot of horror still to come before that happens. It's always darkest before dawn, and the lowest moment of all may very well be when we see Blackbeard ascend to become the Pirate King. And to be the first to know when Blackbeard becomes the thing it is I just said, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed. Here are 3 One Piece theories that will keep you up at night. Because even though One Piece is your very typical, lovely, wacky, feel-good story, it does have a distinct element of dark and disturbing. And as it turns out, the more you dig, the more darker and more disturbing it gets. And so we're going to start with the demon possession theory. We have seen evidence of demons in One Piece not once, not twice, but thrice. And evidence of the afterlife in general is nothing new for the series. We even have the rather bold confirmation of the existence of souls, and we've even seen one passing away into the afterlife with Lao Ji. Or indeed, we've also seen souls return to the before the afterlife with Brook. So other realms do exist in One Piece, and as much as we have evidence of some sort of heaven, we also have evidence of some sort of hell. And there's no better place to start this than with the alleged King of Hell himself. The Straw Hat Swordsman, Roronoa Zoro, has been referred to as a demon ever since chapter 3 of the series, where Koby refers to him as a demon, which is what I just said. A demon in human form, to be precise. And at the time, this was taken as a bit of a Kobyism, he's a scared child. He exaggerates. He's a very timid little boy who soils his trousers at any sign of mild aggression. But then, as One Piece went on, Kobe's words started to become scarily literal. Enies Lobby is a big turning point in Zoro's journey, which resulted in a brand new technique called Demon Aura 9 Sword Style. And there it is, and there's the word again. And how Zoro achieved growing an extra 4 arms, 2 heads, and even 6 swords has yet to be revealed. But that's not the only demonic oddity present in Enies Lobby. Something I very, very rarely see people talking about is during Enies Lobby when Zoro used a technique called Charming Demon Sleepless Night Onigiri. It seems to be a bit of a precursor to Ashura that allowed Zoro to create this illusion of his swords bending. And there's also the literal demon that appears behind him with glowing red eyes and such, which in the manga could be seen as a fun stylistic choice. Like when Zoro performed the very fun to say crab grab. When he did that, we saw a crab, but the crab wasn't literally there. Although with Charming Demon, the anime makes it seem much more like a literal presence, as if it's a big specter being conjured by Zoro. I will say that the anime often really plays up Zoro's demonic aspects. They make a lot of, how shall we say, creative choices, such as giving him this ominous aura or crimson red eyes, whereas a lot of these moments in the manga are just Zoro being a regular dude. There's a lot less demonicness in the manga. But I don't blame the anime, because the fact is that Zoro's existence remains thematically tied to dark concepts like curses, demons, hell, and even the Grim Reaper who popped up on Wano. Zoro also has a keen sense and taste for blood. And if this was the only time that something like this had happened, look, we wouldn't even be talking about it. But there are 2 others, and they're both much more convincing than Zoro. Our next demonic entity is Cavendish, or more accurately, Hakuba. The 2 have a very Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde sort of situation happening, and this is a condition that's explained as a combination of 3 separate conditions, being narcolepsy, sleepwalking, and dissociative identity disorder, all coming together to create the illusion of a demonic presence taking control of Cavendish's body. And as cool as that is, I'm a big fan of Occam's razor, which is the principle that the simplest answer is most likely correct. And in this fictional pirate comic, the simplest answer is not necessarily the painstaking 3-combination medical condition one. In fact, that's almost like a desperate attempt to explain something much more obvious and much more disturbing. Hakuba could very well be a demon possessing Cavendish. When Hakuba is in control, Cavendish's face morphs. If you look at his eyes in particular, they contort to a completely different shape and occupy diagonal slices of his face. And whilst the eyes are almost always portrayed as stark white, there is one panel where Cavendish is trying to wrestle control away from Hakuba, and the Hakuba eye color is different from Cavendish's natural eye color. So I've been told that my eyes can change from blue to gray depending on the day and the lighting, but this is something else. What happens is a light switch effect where Cavendish completely loses who he is. He becomes a soulless entity with a single mission, which is to cut slice as many people as possible before returning to blissful sleep. Demonic is really the only way to describe it, and he's not even the most terrifying one. That would be Charlotte Lin Lin. And remember what I said about Zoro and how the anime tends to stylize him with all of the glowing red eyes and such that wasn't necessarily in the manga? Well, with Charlotte Lin Lin in the manga, that's not even up for debate, because the manga flat out gives her these glowing eyes whenever she's in a hunger state. This isn't a stylistic anime choice. These glowing, sinister eyes, they're actually happening. And Charlotte Lin Lin was not born an evil person. As a child, she was as innocent and as lovely as you could hope. All she wanted to do was live happily with her assorted friends and eat lots and lots of nice food. But then, in certain moments, a switch flips that completely changes her personality into what I can only describe as a demon. An insatiable, rampaging entity determined to consume anything and everything. It's very similar to Cavendish's affliction, however it gets triggered under different conditions. With Big Mom, it's about hunger, and with Cavendish, it's about fatigue. So these states unfortunately respond to very basic human needs that we all need to do, and so it can't ever be prevented. Very bad news for them, and also very bad news for everyone around them. However, it does give us a clue as to what they may be. There is this idea that the demons in One Piece could be based on the 7 deadly sins, because you've got the obvious with Big Mom being gluttony, and then we also have Cavendish, who could be a very possible sloth, emerging in response to sleep, and with Zoro, I dare say that pride would be a pretty solid contender for his affliction. Each of these characters, regardless of demonic presence, represents the pinnacle of their respective sin, and that could be because of a presence inside of them that has manifested at multiple points now in One Piece. And it could also mean that there are 4 other demons out there that we have yet to discover. Or who knows, maybe Big Mom got unlucky and has the lust demon as well. Hence all of the intercourse resulting in all of the children. So that's the demon possession theory. But now we're going to move on to something much more disturbing, because this next idea is completely man-made. This is the Bridge of Purgatory theory, which begins with recognizing that the One Piece world is full of amazing feats of engineering, especially for a planet theoretically stuck in the age of piracy. There are so many mega structures that boggle the mind, such as Fishman Island, but there is one structure that dwarfs even entire islands, and that is Tequila Wolf, a bridge that has been under construction for the last 700 years and is so unfathomably long that currently we don't know where it starts or indeed where it's intended to end, or even if it's ever intended to end. This bridge is so big that it has the status of being its own nation, and as you can imagine, it's bigger than the vast majority of nations within the actual One Piece world. My favorite image for showing just how stupidly large the bridge is would be this one where Robin is being escorted by the Revolutionary Army after having been freed, and you can barely even see their cart traveling along this colossal structure, and this is just a tiny piece of it. But also, this bridge is so large that it contains ancient ruins from various time periods when the bridge itself was being built, and whilst Robin was there, she passed through a construction site from over 300 years ago. So the obvious question is, what is the purpose of this bridge? And immediately I suppose it evokes the vanity project of some world noble who wanted to make his mark on history, sort of like the pyramids or something. But one idea is that the bridge has a much more logical purpose, designed to span and connect the entire world in order to make travel and trade a lot easier. One bridge that could take you to all of the blues and even the Grand Line and the New World. And some very ambitious thinkers have also proposed that this could be the beginning of another red line, the skeleton of a new red line, the foundation of a much larger project designed to separate the world. And I don't buy so much into that one, but in regards to connecting the world, whilst it would be revolutionary for concepts like trade and freedom, that's not really what the world government is in the business of doing. And I think the explanation is much simpler and much more horrifying. Something that's always stuck with me is how Bunny Joe described the bridge. The Celestial Dragons ordered it built. Its purpose isn't important. Countless slaves have perished in its construction. Nothing will change that. Now, I understand that this was Bunny Joe speaking from his perspective. He doesn't care why Tequila Wolf was being built. He just cares about all of the suffering that went into it. And would you look at that? I think that Bunny Joe has something in common with the world government, because I don't think they care about why the bridge is being built either. The really dark undertones of Tequila Wolf is that it's designed to be more of a prison than a project. This is a location that slaves are sent to in order to work, and there is no greater purpose for that work. The world government are just doing this because they can. They've purposely selected a project that can never be completed in a very Sisyphean sort of way, which is the story of Sisyphus being forced to roll a boulder up a hill only for it to roll all the way back down, rinse and repeat for all eternity. So that's why all of the camps left in ruin, because the bridge serves no purpose. There's no reason to clear them. It's exactly the sort of thing that the world nobles would conjure. They have practically unlimited resources to pump into the bridge, and it serves as a sickening endless purgatory for them to punish their slaves for all eternity. And even in the case where, say, another 700 years down the line, the bridge does get finished, you know what the world nobles would do then? They'd destroy it and tell the slaves to start over. Or even worse, they might have two groups of slaves functioning at any given time. One group to construct the bridge and one to simultaneously deconstruct it, so that the bridge will be an eternal project that can never be completed, just like Sisyphus and the boulder. I really don't think this bridge serves a purpose greater than torture. It's a living hell that the world nobles are able to use as a threat and also as a source of entertainment. It is the one location in the world where its inhabitants are stripped of absolutely everything, freedom and reason, and that is the never-ending Bridge of Purgatory. Not an amazing place to be, but our next theory is also spawned from the mind of a man, or at least that's the current idea. Chapter 1069 revolutionized devil fruit thinking in a very dangerous way through Vegapunk's current devil fruit theory. Every devil fruit is a possibility for human evolution that someone desired. If only I could be like this, if only I could be like that. All of these powers represent the many branches of the future of humanity, but that unnatural status is loathed by the sea, the mother of nature, a fitting punishment for its sin. Those with powers exist in different dimensions dreamed up by someone else before them. This is my only theory. Literally the biggest mind in the world who has been studying fictional fruit for years, decades I guess. All that time, and he only has this one theory. And as much as Vegapunk says these words with a sense of amazement and wonder of an objective scientist, it also comes with some very unpleasant realities. This is the Dark Desires theory, and it starts by making the link that all devil fruits were developed in response to desire, which regardless of which method is taken was probably true, if it was magically willed into existence or a meticulously crafted endeavor of science. And there are those with what we'll call pure desires, like wanting to make people smile. There are those with questionable desires, like covering themselves in mucus. Not amazing, but ultimately harmless for everyone except them. And then there are those with desires that are simply evil. For example, if Sugar's hobby hobby fruit was to be the subject of this theory, then it means that someone in the past had a very specific desire to enslave people, but not like our usual form of slavery. No. This brand of slavery came with an extra macabre twist, because the originator of this fruit wanted to play with people like toys, and they even baked eternal youth into the fruit's abilities to ensure that they would be able to play with their toys for as long as they wanted. I really don't think there's a positive interpretation we can give to this fruit like we can with some others, because there are innocent fruits that can be used for evils, like say Charlotte Smoothie's Shibo powers. I reckon that this was born out of a pure desire to just drink some juice, but it had evil applications, and Smoothie puts it to use creating torture bars, where her guests are served the tangible, liquidy life force of her victims. Again, the creator was probably just really thirsty that day and really wanted a quicker way to get some juice. Or a kinder version of the hobby fruit would be Tama's devil fruit, which embodies the innocent desire of wanting to be friends with animals, which can result in arguable slavery, but within the power structure of the fruit, eventually the animal in question is given the free will to choose what it wants to do. With the hobby fruit though, the rules are quite specific in that the user needs to create a contract with the toy slaves. It's disturbingly well thought out on a legislative level and can only be the creation of someone who had bad intent for its use. And I would say the same for the Sorosoro fruit, someone who had a specific desire to manipulate the souls of others and control their lifespan to create, once again, a series of slaves to do their bidding. So much slavery in this video. And even something like the Memo fruit can be taken in a dark direction. This was the product of someone with a strong desire to manipulate others through their memories. And given all this talk on Egghead Island about how a person's memories may very well constitute life itself, memory manipulation isn't exactly a light transgression. And all of this is before we even consider the Yami no Mi, which is the subject of a bit of a controversial translation. In English, Blackbeard states that this is said to be the most dangerous power in the history of devil fruits. However, in the original Japanese, this can also be translated as evil, as in the most evil power in the history of devil fruits. Not the only evil power, the most evil. And just as a side note, one of the first attacks that Blackbeard uses with this devil fruit is rather appropriately named Liberation, which draws a lovely dark parallel to Luffy's ability to become the warrior of liberation. So for every good intention, there is an equal and opposite bad intention. That's what this devil fruit theory is telling us, which has some pretty deep implications for the Will of D. If the fruits were created by this ancient kingdom, then it would indicate that they weren't exactly the unfortunate victims of the world government that we currently suspect, and that perhaps there may be a very good reason why at least some of them are considered to be demons and enemies of the gods. What really strikes me about Vegapunk's theory though is that he is a man of science, the biggest of all of the sciencemen, and even he still believes in a supernatural element. He specifically mentions the sea, the mother of nature, and implies that these alternate paths for humanity are sins against it. He genuinely believes that there is a greater force out there that even he cannot explain. Either way, devil fruits are not objective concepts. Each one of them comes with a degree of inherited will. Their users are living out the wildest dreams of those who originally conjured them, and to many, a lot of those dreams would resemble our worst nightmares. But to steer clear of nightmares, I would recommend subscribing to this channel for consistent injections of sweet, lovely One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feeds.